Council Chair, we are now live.
Thank you, Lonnie. Good afternoon, everyone. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make the remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, Legal Intelligencer. Second, please give us a second. The Inquirer, the Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings, and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I now note that the hour has come. Rachel, will you please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance will please indicate that you are present when your name is called. Also, just please say a few brief words when you are responding so that your image will be displayed on screen when you speak.
Councilmember Derek Green.
Present. Looking forward to a good, long government committee hearing.
Councilmember David O.
Present.
Councilmember Helen Gim.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Looking forward to a long government hearing. It feels like we never left.
Councilmember Curtis Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I concur. It's afternoon, not morning.
Afternoon, wow.
Councilmember Brian O'Neill. Councilmember Cindy Bass.
Good afternoon. I am absolutely present.
Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez.
Good afternoon. It's going to be a long day. Thank you for your patience.
Councilmember Mark Scola. Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez.
Good afternoon. It's going to be a long day. Thank you for your patience.
Councilmember Mark Scola.
Somebody needs to put their TV on mute.
Rachel, does that conclude the roll call?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. A quorum of the committee is present in this hearing.
Here, Madam Chairwoman.
I'm sorry, who was that speaking?
Brian O'Neill.
Oh, Councilman O'Neill, thank you. The clerk will please add Councilman Brian O'Neill to the roll. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Law and Government regarding bill numbers 200355, 200363, 200367, 200370, and resolution number 200377. Rachel, will you please read the title of the bills and resolutions?
200355, an ordinance amending an ordinance, bill number 180293, entitled an ordinance authorizing the revision of lines and grades on a portion of City Plan numbers 34S and 41S by striking from the City Plan and vacating the legally open portions of Packer Avenue from Christopher Columbus Boulevard to the Pierhead Line of the Delaware River and reserving and placing on the City Plan a right-of-way for sewer and drainage purposes, water main purposes, and public utility purposes, with the lines of Packer Avenue being stricken and authorizing acceptance of the grant to the city of the said right-of-way under certain terms and conditions. 200363, an ordinance amending section 20-101 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Residence Requirements by restoring the requirement that no person shall be appointed as an employee in the civil service, including but not limited to police officers, unless he or she has been a bona fide resident of the city for at least 1 year prior to appointment. 200367, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified electors of the City of Philadelphia of the proposals set forth in a resolution approved by council proposing an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter relating to the creation of the Citizens Police Oversight Commission and authorizing the appropriate officers to publish notice and to make arrangements
Sean, I like it.
for this special election, all under certain terms and conditions. 200370, an ordinance authorizing the procurement commissioner on behalf of the city to enter into concession agreement with Bicycle Transit Systems Incorporated for the operation, maintenance, and expansion of a bicycle sharing system and essential service during the COVID-19 period under certain terms and conditions. And 200377, resolution proposing an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter to provide for the creation of a Citizens Police Oversight Commission and to authorize City Council by ordinance to determine the composition, powers, and duties of the commission, and providing for the submission of the amendment to the electors of Philadelphia.
Now, before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for the questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Now, before I ask Rachel to call the first panel for bill number 200363, I would like to make some opening comments. Let me note for the record that as chair of City Council's Committee on Labor and Civil Service, when Council President Clark asked me to introduce bill number 200363 on his behalf, I enthusiastically said yes. And since its introduction, I need to say for the benefit of the public that I have been disheartened but not surprised to have people reaching out to me about this bill, which simply requires those who want to work for the city in a civil service capacity to live in the city as a resident for at least 1 year before becoming employed by the city. They have stated that this bill will hurt the city in its ability to attract top talent and fill empty positions. Now, before I, for the record, address those concerns, I want to note a few points of interest for the public. You need to know that the bill applies only to civil service new hires, and it does not affect any existing collective bargaining agreement. So this is prospective, only future hires. The bill merely restores the residency requirement that was law for all civil service employees for 55 years and is still the law for civil service laborers who are represented by District Council 33. And I want to note for the record that these are our blue collar workers who, if we haven't learned recently that they are essential, we know that they are on the front line. In addition to that, the Home Rule Charter allows the Civil Service Commission to waive the residency requirement at the request of the personnel director when there aren't qualified Philadelphia residents available to fill vacant positions. What are you saying, Sherelle? Although Philadelphia is known for our distinguished eds and mads, let's say the city needed to fill a position, and hypothetically, they could find no one coming from Drexel, the University of Pennsylvania, Temple, LaSalle, Chestnut Hill College, and let's not talk about the two neighboring historically black colleges and universities that are near us, 45 minutes to an hour away, in Lincoln University and Cheney University. we have places that we can go for recruitment. In addition, this waiver process is more than adequate to address hard-to-fill job vacancies requiring special skills or expertise that are not available in the city. That higher education pool that I just acknowledged is a great place to start. In addition, the residency requirement does not apply to appointed positions, including the personnel director, the finance director, the MDO, the city representative, the treasurer, heads of departments, or deputies, and exempts. So you might ask yourself, why have individuals been saying that this bill will hurt the city in its ability to attract top talent and fill empty positions? You know, I can't answer for them, but I've been assuming that it's related to something else that individuals have been saying for years, and that is that we in the city of Philadelphia need to better train and educate our citizens so that they are more than qualified to gain access to good family-sustaining jobs. So my question is this: should we just give up and accept that some Philadelphians may not currently be educated or trained enough according to our desires to do some of these city jobs? Or should we instead roll up our sleeves and begin working on addressing the underlying issues? I have also heard some say that by having a residency requirement, it puts Philadelphia at a competitive disadvantage with other cities. Again, when I think about the institutions of higher learning in Philadelphia, I don't think that to be the case. In addition to that, let me say this. I would think that by giving a leg up to Philadelphia residents when it comes to city jobs, we are doing a service to our citizenry. Don't forget that we are the poorest big city in the nation. And we use this tool in incentivizing residency with our city hiring as a tool in our toolbox to do away with that narrative and, quite frankly, that alarming stat. In addition, we should use this as a way to get more of our residents into good family-sustaining jobs. Now, finally, I've got to state this for the record because some of my constituents who have been paying attention to this have said, Sherelle, you know, something doesn't smell right with this, and people saying that they're against it, particularly in light of the recent events and civil unrest that we've seen take place, not just in our city and state, but across the nation and the globe. But what I find really interesting, that around the same time that we moved as it relates to our demographic and Philadelphia became a majority minority city, all of a sudden there was major concern about folks talking about that, you know, we won't have the ability, you know, to fill city positions with our residents. Listen, I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just telling you that when engaging in discussion with my constituents about the bill in front of us, that is an issue that was raised. And if that's not the fact, you tell me what is. And if that is the fact, then we need to better educate and train our constituency. Then that's on Philadelphia. That's on us as a city, and we need to work with that to get done. Now, with that being said, Rachel, will you please call the first panel? We have to testify this afternoon on bill number 200363.
Stephanie Tipton and Mike Zaccagni.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Parker, Chair of the Committee on Law and Government, Councilmember Green, Vice Chair, and members of the Council, the Committee on Law and Government, as well as the bill sponsors. My name is Stephanie Tipton. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Philadelphia. I'm joined by Mike Zaccagni, Director of the Office of Human Resources. We're here to provide testimony on bill number 200363 and answer any questions you might have. Along with me today are representatives from several operating departments as well. For the sake of brevity, given the number of witnesses and the other bills that we need to hear today, I'm going to provide a summary of my written testimony, which all of you should have. First, the administration does not oppose the intent of the bill. We strongly believe that every effort should be made to grow our own talent and fill city jobs with city residents. And we're doing that. Currently, we have nearly 85% of our civil service applicants and hires residing here in Philadelphia. We're also committed to removing the residency waiver after 5 years for police, fire, and deputy sheriffs in the next round of contract negotiations. However, I also think it important for us to make the body aware of some of the potential impacts the bill may have on our recruitment and hiring efforts. We're committed to working collaboratively with council to realize the intent of the bill while also minimizing the impacts the bill may have on any of our operations. So that concludes my summary, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Mike and I are both here, as well as a few other departments.
Thank you, Stephanie. So, Mike, will you be providing? I didn't hear you, Steph. Did you say that your testimony represented both you and Mike, and he's just here to answer questions?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you so very much. And I'm looking in the chat box for any of my colleagues who wish to be recognized. Stephanie, help me if you will. I just heard you say that nearly 85% of all civil service positions are filled by city residents. So if we say that another way, that means that about 15% of all of our civil service positions are filled by non-residents. Now tell me, those are the percentages. Tell me in terms of the number of employees those percentages represent.
Sure. If you can give me a second, I think Mike Zaccagni just dropped off a Teams, so he has some of the data. Unfortunately, his computer just died.
But if you look
and while we're waiting for that, let me just acknowledge for the record that Councilman Squilla and both Councilmember Gim are present. I just see that in the chat box, and I want to make sure the clerk has that for the record.
Yeah. And so what I'm going to do is just shift over here. There's Mike in the back there.
Oh, yes. Councilman Squilla? Thank you.
I was just thanking you for recognition.
Oh, sure. No problem, sir. Mike, we see you back, and thank you guys for being socially distanced.
Yes.
I apologize for this. As this started, my computer died. Most of the data is on there, but if we look at the overall numbers for the city workforce, which are between 28 and 30,000, I'm estimating this over my head. Obviously, we look at about, if it's 15%, 10 would be 3. You're looking at about 3 to 4,500, about 4,500 people that would be from outside the city.
Tell me if you can, Mike, what jobs or departments would you say are most filled by non-residents?
I can probably provide that information off the top of my head. There's a lot of smaller positions that this impacts, things like graduate engineers that have a high percentage. Quite frankly, police officer recruit right now has a higher percentage. We have a smaller number of titles like airport operations worker that has a very high percentage because they have very, very detailed background and requirements. So there are a number of positions throughout that have higher percentages, and then you look at the others. Obviously, laborers have their carve-outs. Correctional officers has a very small percentage of numbers. I believe it was around 6%. So when you look at across the department, and we can share some of these numbers with you, Councilwoman. I apologize again for the technology glitch that I just had. But there varies as you look across departments.
Let me ask you this. Why do you think the city sometimes is having difficult finding residents to fill its jobs? And from my perspective, I want to know, do you think that this perhaps sort of speaks to a larger systemic issue that we are not adequately educating and training our own constituency, and particularly those who are in the minority community? So aside from what we're talking about today via residency, we can't go through this issue without talking about the future need to change Philadelphia's rule of two, right? Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown talked about that, and that's something that we're not going to give up hope on, but we'll deal with that at another time. Tell me, what do you think the barrier is about why we're having difficulty finding residents to fill these jobs with all of the institutions of higher learning that I just acknowledged? And excuse me, CCP, which is truly the city's college, Community College of Philadelphia. I did not mention CCP in our opening. Tell me, what do you think the difficulty is?
Councilwoman, including my day job here, I've been in adult education for over 30 years and actually teach in a return to learning program that is predominantly focused on minority individuals who are trying to get their degree back. So yes, we have a challenge across the city of educating our citizens and making sure that education is a priority. And when I say education, I don't just mean college degree. I mean any type of education. The CTE programs in the schools. We just actually changed the requirements for all of our entry-level trades classes so that those positions can qualify now without having the 6 months experience. So a high school student coming out of an approved CTE program qualifies for all of our entry-level trades. I agree with you that this is a longer-term thing. We have to look at this from an educational standpoint. Unfortunately, that's sort of out of our abilities within HR or within the city to be able to deal with that. But as I said, I've been in education a long time, and these are systemic issues that go across the board that we have to do a better job on. I agree with you 100% on those.
So Stephanie and Mike, let me just state for the record that I appreciate your testimony and the roles that both of you serve for the administration. I just want to say to the viewing public that I don't agree. I do not agree that the waiver process, and that's what I want residents of the city to know, that if there is any position that we have to fill in the city of Philadelphia, and let's just say by chance that we could not find anyone within the pool that has city residency, the city has the ability, there is a process in place that the administration can work with the Civil Service Commission, and they can get a waiver. And they could get waivers like candy if they wanted to. I'm talking about they could say remember they just said that there are about 4,500 jobs, and that was just an estimate. Let's say 3,500 to 4,500 jobs in the city until they get the actual numbers that are filled by people, 15%, who are not residents of the city of Philadelphia. And if that is the case, and they needed to get 1,000 more waivers, there is a process included already relative to waivers that the city can employ. And if the administration thinks that they need a process that is even more simple, I mean, if the existing waiver process needs to be streamlined even more, that is something that we can work on. Right now, I'm looking
Council member, can I just want to point of clarification. I think we recognize the waiver process, and we're thankful that there is a waiver process in place under the ordinance. I think one of the things that is a bit challenging recruitment, that a waiver might be necessary. And so, we don't know what the job market might look like, or if there's changing, conditions. And so we may have to go through a full recruitment and testing cycle before we recognize that we don't have enough people, we've exhausted the list, and now we may be in a position to request a waiver. So I think, we recognize that there is that process in place, and surely, we will, use it if necessary, but I think it's just important to understand that could cause a delay in the overall time to hire and filling of certain positions within departments. So I appreciate that there's a waiver process. I think it's important to make sure the body understands that, we may not always know at the time that we're starting to recruit and test for a particular position. So
Stephanie, I really do appreciate your clarifying that for the record. But again, for the benefit of the viewing public, I want you to know that the city currently has a hiring freeze for the foreseeable future. And we don't know how long that hiring freeze will be in existence, especially given not 649, but the $749 million budget hole that we are working right now in partnership with the administration to try to fill. In addition to that, for those who are watching, note that if what you just described, Stephanie, and I take you at your word that sometimes you just don't know, if what we need to do is further streamline that waiver process to make it even more simpler for you when you just find out at the last minute when we need to hire someone immediately. I know I and many of my colleagues here would be more than happy to work with you all if legislation would be required, or if you would be able to do that via executive order just from the administration. But if that is what you needed to streamline that waiver process, call on us to help you. We want to do that, but we want to ensure that Philadelphians are incentivized and get access to the ability to these self-sustaining jobs. Chair recognizes Councilman Curtis Jones for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really, because of the long agenda for today, wanted to put myself on mute for every other bill other than mine, just for brevity. However, I feel compelled to ask the question that Philadelphia is the only city of the first class in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, correct? Yes.
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 Other municipalities that are smaller than us have residency requirements, correct?
I'm not aware of these specific residency requirements. They may be more similar to what we have currently, where you do have to live in the city within a certain period of time after being hired, which is currently the case here.
Well, I would like you to provide to the chair the surrounding 8 counties and look at those that have residency requirements, and then look at comparable job classifications and ask them the question of how they find talent in a smaller population when we have 1.5 million people to choose from, with hundreds of education institutions, from certifications, technical institutions to schools of higher learning, how they manage to do that, and we cannot. The other thing that I would say as a comment, Madam Chair, particularly with police, it is not allowed for police to serve in their own district that they actually live in. So if you live in the 4th Councilmanic District, you can't live in the 4th Councilmanic. You have to live in the 9th, and vice versa. So when on my block, there was a police officer that would get off of work, and I never forgot this, who lived on my block, and there were young people, spirited young people, who often spoke too loud, drank too much, and did things that young people do. Whenever she came home, all of that activity stopped.
Wow.
Whenever she got out of her car in her partial uniform and her service belt and all of her equipment, all she had to do was glance across the street and the climate on my block changed. This is an important factor in this legislation, because all of the bills that you see today are in some way related and need to be kind of packaged like they are. So when you ride by a situation, I don't know about you, but Council Member Parker and others, when you're a district council person, when you ride through somebody else's district, you kind of care about that problem that they might have, but you're not reaching for the memo pad or the iPhone to solve it, because that's I don't live here, that's their issue. Now the at-large people don't get that. I'm talking about when you have a district, I know exactly when I'm out of my district. When more people live in the city of Philadelphia, no matter what department you have, whether you're in sanitation, whether you're in policing, whether you're in social work, no matter what department, you take ownership, because the problem is yours. You can't drive over to another county line and be done with it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Jones, and your point is well noted for the record. Not only do we want to promote residency, but it makes good economic sense. right, to have those people contributing to our tax base, and particularly real estate taxes, and helping us to grow the economic pie. So thank you. Are there any questions or comments from any other members of the committee for this panel? Hearing none, I want to say thank you, Stephanie and Mike, for your testimony. We appreciate it a great deal. There being none, Rachel, will you please call the next panel to testify on this bill?
Bilal Qayyum, Jihad Ali, and Joanne Bell.
Good afternoon.
Bilal,
My name is Bilal.
Bilal, Jihad, and Joanne, can I just hear the three of you say something so we can know that your audio is working?
Yes, this is Bilal Qayyum.
Jihad?
Good afternoon, Chairperson. This is Jihad Ali.
Joanne? Okay, we'll give Ms. Bell some time to get on. Lonnie, if you're here and we have any more technical difficulties, let's see what we can do to get Ms. Bell connected. With that being said, we'll start with you, Bilal. If you could just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Bilal Qayyum, President of the Father's Day Rally Committee. I would like to thank Councilwoman Sorrell Parker and members of the Law and Government Committee for holding this hearing on resolution number 200363, Civil Service Residency Requirement. My testimony, Councilwoman, will not be long. A lot of what was said earlier, actually, my good friend Councilman Jones was making some comments that I was going to make. But I will say that to the council members and to the citizens of this city, as a citizen of the city, I feel insulted that we even having some of this conversation with 1.5 or 1.6 million Philadelphians. We can't find qualified individuals out of our city. It's almost an insult to me that even that's even part of the discussion. There's no position in city government, and I worked in city government for 34 years, that we can't find somebody in the city of Philadelphia to fill. There are talented people in all races and in every neighborhood in this city. If we do the right outreach, we could find those individuals. So once again, I am totally in favor that if you want to work in Philadelphia, you should live in Philadelphia. So I am total in favor of this bill. Also, I would like to say that one of the things that we don't like to talk about is always the elephant in the room, and that is white institutional racism. For many years in the city of Philadelphia, particularly black folks could not get in some positions, even though they were qualified, not only qualified, overqualified to work in the city government because of racism. I think that we also, in this time that we're living in now, that has to be put on the table when we talk about, when we hear this argument, we can't find workers. In some sense, I'm hearing that argument, we can't find white workers to work in positions. But we have plenty of black workers that they don't open up the opportunities for those individuals to have a shot to fulfill these positions. So once again, I am totally in favor of this bill. I hope that all council will support it and vote on it as past due, and particularly as it relates to the police. If you look at the last police classes, most of them have been white, and a lot of them are non-Philadelphians. They don't understand Philadelphia. They don't have the culture or the understanding of our culture, of the majority of people in the city are people of color, which is creating some of the problems we're seeing now in the city of Philadelphia. I don't know who those individuals were last week or the week before last during the incidents in the city, if they were Philadelphians or non-Philadelphians, police officers committing some of the acts they have done. So I believe that this is on time, and we need to get behind this fully, and hopefully, once again, the council will vote unanimously to pass this bill. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Bilal, for your testimony. Jihad, will you state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony? And we'll close out this panel with Ms. Joanne Bell. I see that she has joined us.
I am Jihad Ali. I'm providing testimony on Ordinance 200363, restoring the residency requirements for civil service, including police officers. I am a veteran and I am a retired sergeant of the Philadelphia Police Department. I've served from 1984 to 2001, and also my daughter is an active duty police officer. I think it's important that this council restores the residency requirements section of 20101 of the Philadelphia Code. When the Councilman Kenny, who was the original sponsor of the bill in 2008, when he was asked what was the reason that we were doing that bill at that time by Vice Council Green at the time, Councilman Jones, Good, Councilwoman Blackwell, the reason was given was that it was to get the best and the brightest for the job. Councilman Good, in the transcript of the time, Councilman Good and Councilman Jones, along with Blackwell, asked several questions about why is it that we can't get the best and the brightest when it comes to the police department, but the rest of the city, we're basically getting 90% of whatever's there. So at the time, there was a lot of contention over this bill. I was in the class, I became a police officer in 1984. I was 4 years out of the Marine Corps, and I applied for the job. But that was an error where we were trying to have African Americans include the ranks of the police department. You had before that time, we used to have council with the former police commissioner. Sylvester Johnson would tell you there were very little blacks on the department at that time, African Americans. And so the thrust was to get African Americans on that job, and we really increased the job. Don't forget, we had the likes of Willie Williams Sr., Sylvester Johnson, Alfonso Deal, who went through hell to be a police officer. So when we started getting the department started reflecting more of the diversity of the city. Then all of a sudden, this is after I got out, and I got out in 2001. In 2008, Councilman Kenny at the time was a champion of this bill. People on my side of the table would argue that the reason was to enlighten the police department, because we were saying at the time that it was going to eliminate Philadelphians from applying for the jobs. And that's what gave us the advantage. Being from Philadelphia, we applied for the job. One of the points that Councilwoman Blackwell raised at the time was that council is there to look out for the benefits and opportunities for the people that elect them. Unfortunately, what happens now, we get people that take the job, they come in from the counties, they're like an occupying force. They can't relate to the people. In the counties surrounding Philadelphia, it's possible that you don't interact with an African American on a daily basis for weeks at a time. So I think it's important that we consider this in light of the recent blood murder of George Floyd and Rayshon Brooks. It's appropriate that this council reexamine the policies and practices and procedures that may result in rules and regulations that were adopted years ago that are eliminating us from the very jobs that we seek to fill. So thank you for allowing me to provide testimony.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The chair recognizes Ms. Joanne Bell. I know she's on now. And Mrs. Bell, if you could just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. Ms. Bell, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can hear you now. Thank you so very much. State your name and please proceed.
Okay. My name is Joanne Bell, and I'm the co-convener of Black Women's Leadership Council, an organization representing an active membership of over 500 women, mostly residing in Philadelphia. Here today, delivering Chappelle Rita Hill as co-host of Black Women's Leadership Council, and we are streaming live. You are on a live broadcast because we are on radio today, and we are on 900 AM and 91.6, and we're streaming across the country, perhaps the world. So we want to, since 2000, Black Women's Leadership Council has been at the forefront of police reform. We recognize that rural law enforcement works hard and the work is different, but we need the officers to see the residents of Philadelphia as people, and that people are sometimes in distress. And we do not need an occupying force. I agree with the gentleman before us. We were extremely concerned by the change in the residency rules. I have lived in Philadelphia for many years, and I have worked with the police department. I've worked with Willie Williams, and I remember when he came into power and how he was treated and how the officers tried to isolate him, and he was not able to bring up a command structure that could support him. We see the police dealing with the persistent ravages of poverty and discrimination. And we believe that there is a history here of implicit bias and cultural insensitivity. And it doesn't matter how much training you give someone, is that they have to feel like they have a stake in the city. We want the officers to be required to live in the city, because no city or municipality should be policed by an outside occupying force who develops a disdain for the people who pay their salaries. No city employee should enjoy salary and benefits provided by taxpayers, base that's struggling for decent schools and clean streets and other public accommodations without contributing to that tax base. Officers who live in the city have a stake in the city and an overall outcomes for good policing. Philadelphia residents will view them as neighbors and not as aggressors. Philadelphia is an ethnic mosaic whose beauty can only be enhanced by committed peace officers, and I emphasize peace officers, who they themselves view themselves as a part of the community. And finally, I want to say that I have two retired police officers in my family. Both served Philadelphia and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They served with an understanding and a compassion while living in the city and raised and educated children who went on to become college graduates. Living in a city was not an impediment to the success of raising their children. I thank you.
Thank you. We want to say a special thank you to Mr. Qayyum, Mr. Ali, and Ms. Bell for your testimony and for affirming what we have heard from residents across the city of Philadelphia, particularly in response to the civil unrest. And that is, it makes good common sense and good economic sense for the people policing Philadelphia to be Philadelphians. Very, very simply. I do have to ask you for the record, though, and Ms. Bell, I want to have both you and Mr. Qayyum to answer this question because both of you acknowledge your familiarity with employment in the city. We're talking about this impacting not just the new hiring of police officers in the city of Philadelphia, but we're talking about the entire city of Philadelphia, a cohort of employees. We're talking about 28 to 30,000. What do you think about this as it relates to positions that are non-police related? Do you think it's necessary from that perspective as well? And Mr. Qayyum and Ms. Bell, can either one of you respond?
I believe that all city employees should live in the city. I have a history and a background. I was once the vice president of District Council 47, so I represented an employee organization. And I think the city benefits because you increase the tax base. You have a stake in where you live. And I think it's important that if you're going to enjoy the benefits, the tax-based benefits, that you ought to contribute to that, and not just solely by wage tax, by real estate tax, by everything that you do. When you have a stake in something, you want to see it do better and you want to see it grow. So I want all city employees, regardless of what level or where they serve, to live in the city of Philadelphia. If I did it and could do it, they can do it.
Mr. Qayyum?
Yes, Councilwoman. I echo what Ms. Bell just said, and in my previous remarks, and I'm serious about this, and Councilman Jones said, no, we got a city of 1.5, 1.6 million people. No way in the world you could tell me, Councilwoman, that is not someone sitting in someone's house given the opportunity could perform any position in the city of Philadelphia, from elected officials to appointed officials to every line item in the city of Philadelphia where there's workers. There's somebody in this city, if you give them the opportunity, should be hired and they could perform the job. So I think clearly that everyone who works in the city of Philadelphia has to and should be work. And also I would make this comment. I know this bill talks about a person has to live in the city for 1 year before they could apply for a job, and if they are successful in that job, they have to live in the city for at least 5 years because of collective bargaining. I think the city really has to challenge that collective collective agreement, and that when they go into a collective agreement, they need to challenge that. I think that once you get a job in the city of Philadelphia, you should work in the city of Philadelphia until you die. I'm very clear on that. I'm very strongly believe that we could do this as a city. We have very talented people in this city in all neighborhoods and all ethnic groups. So I believe strongly that we need to have people working in Philly, living in Philly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee? There being none, Rachel, will you please call the next panel to testify on this bill? And thank you, Mr. Khayyam, Mr. Ali, and Ms. Bell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next,
All right, we're back.
the next panel is Kathy Scott.
Good afternoon, Chair Parker. I appreciate the opportunity to testify.
Thank you so much, Ms. Scott. You are connected. Just please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Well, my name is Catherine Scott. I'm president of AFSCME District Council 47, and I did submit written testimony. However, I'd like to, you have that on the record, for the record. I just wanted to respond to some of the issues that have been raised, which I think are very legitimate questions. I just want to let people know that AFSCME District Council 47, Local 2186 and 2187 represent members in job classifications, some of which have extremely unique and hard to find positions. The other part of the problem, and I have heard people testify that there is no job that someone who lives in the city of Philadelphia could not fill. I want to start also by saying I absolutely support residency for the city, for people who work in the city of Philadelphia. However, there are not 29,000 civil service employees. That 29,000 employees of the city of Philadelphia includes exempt employees that do not have a residency requirement. And right now, the stringency for hiring people who are civil service, they have the most stringent requirements for being employed by the city, and rightly so, because they provide the citizens of the city with the basic services that need to be provided. But we have pathologists, we have medical specialists, we have pharmacists, other positions that we represent. And I want to focus a little on just one, which is librarian. There is only one school, Drexel University, that offers a Master in Library Science for someone to become a librarian, which is a requirement to be a librarian in the city of Philadelphia. We had so that library to recruit from outside the city because there are not enough graduates from Drexel to provide for librarians in the city. we had a program, we were concerned about diversity. So we tried to work with the library to get more people who work in the library to get their bachelor's degree, to go to community college, get their bachelor's degree, and promote them to being librarians. The library had a grant for that. We had some people very successfully complete the program, and then the money dried up. And so instead of investing in people who work for the library and get them their master's degree, there wasn't the financial support there to be able to continue to do that. So we support promoting education and degrees and the opportunity for people to be able to be citizen, be residents of the city of Philadelphia, and to hold those jobs and be taxpayers and all of the things that you were talking about. I do want to point out, however, the city has a freeze, but the contractors that they contract with are hiring, they don't have a freeze. So you have contracted agencies that are presently hiring to do work that would be done by civil service employees. Contractors do not have a residency requirement. There is no residency requirement for exempt employees. So I would suggest that, yes, there is the possibility for a waiver. There are many waivers for the positions, the classes of, for members of ours that are in those difficult to fill positions. But I think the council should also think about a residency requirement for contractors who work in the city of Philadelphia. The city pays their wages, they pay their benefits under these contracts. And I think that this is something that the city should also consider, because you don't want the unintended consequence of civil service employees, those positions not being filled. And then the city says, oh, we can't fill it, we're contracting out the work. And then you have people living in New Jersey or any place else, Delaware, who are coming into the city and providing those services.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Scott. Does that conclude your testimony?
It does, yes, thank you.
So one, let me just state for the record that you noted when you opened up that you submitted written testimony. Our office has not received a copy of your written testimony. So if there is someone from your staff who can forward that testimony to Rachel Meadows, who is now the clerk for this committee, we can forward that written testimony to all members of the committee. We'll also forward it to all members of council. So Thank you so very much, because we don't have that. Yeah. In addition to that, Stephanie, we want you to know that we see your note that you want to provide a point of clarification following the last witness testimony, and we will get to you as soon as we finish questioning with Ms. Scott. So one, I need to, for the benefit of the people who are listening, you just heard Kathy Scott mention exempt employees. You should note for the record, and again, this is for the benefit of the viewing public, that all exempt employees have to be residents of the city of Philadelphia. All exempt employees have to be residents of the city of Philadelphia. Now, Ms. Scott, as I asked my first question of you, I must state for the record that when you mentioned Drexel University and you mentioned library sciences, Councilwoman Augusta Clark, who was an attorney but also had a master's degree in library sciences from Drexel University, I sort of heard her echo in the importance of this industry. But you would not state for the record that the waiver process that the city currently has in existence, that even if Drexel is the only institution in our area, institution of higher learning in our area, that offers a master's in library services, there are no other institutions that do offer this program. And have we as a city ever attempted to work with any of those other institutions that we have in our area, including Lincoln and Cheney universities, to talk about that path? And let me ask you this, is a Master of Library Sciences the standard operating requirement for library association or affiliated organizations across the nation? We just worked with them as it related to the city doing away with all fines and fees relative to the library. So I wanted you to answer both of those questions.
A master's in library science is, to my knowledge, required as the minimum for being a librarian for public service.
Okay, so, and do you know, since you are obviously the, you mentioned 2186 and you mentioned 2187, do you know whether or not the city has worked to establish a pool to work with institutions of higher learning, a plan to work with historically Black colleges? You mentioned a program with CCP. Do you know of any additional efforts that the city has put forward in order to recruit people for those library roles?
I do not know of any attempt by the city to develop additional programs in the city of Philadelphia. The closest Master's in Library Science that I know of beyond Drexel is Clarion University in Pennsylvania. But frankly, beyond that, most of them are outside of state. The present waiver system for librarians is 1 year. And so they have a year after they are hired by the city to move into the city. So that is a waiver that does exist. I'm just saying that there are a lot of waivers in the city civil service in the city of Philadelphia because of the difficulty in getting people in some job classifications.
So you mentioned one in those librarians, but when you mentioned pharmacy and pathologists, I have a very difficult time with those two industries in particular, and thinking that there's a difficult time to recruit if we've established some sort of systemic process or feeders with institutions of higher learning in our region. In addition to that, let me just, again, for the record, exempt employees don't have to be residents for a year before working, but they do, however, have to live in the city 6 months after beginning to work for the city. So let's make sure we clarify that for the record. Let me ask you a few questions for the benefit of the public who may not know what DC 47 is. And help me here. DC 47 is often referred to as the white collar union in Philadelphia as compared to District Council 33, which is referred to as the blue collar union. I want you to, if you can, walk me through how many members you currently have in District Council 47, and then tell us how many of those, give me the demographic, the racial demographic of that membership.
Presently, the local 2186, which is the first level supervisors in the city of Philadelphia, has around 1,050 members, all civil service. Local 2187, that represents the professional employees of the city. I know it's referred to as the white collar union. But the only classifications are professional employees, and there are approximately 2,400 people in local 218, employees of the city in local 2187. I can't. This would be off the top of my head, but I would say that the demographics is majority women. In local 2187, I think that the majority is around 65% women, 35% men. I believe that the racial breakdown is around 60% African American or people of color in local 2187, and around 40% white.
Okay, so just for the benefit of the viewing public, I want you to say this simply for me. What's the total amount of membership in District Council 47? When you're talking to people about how many city workers you represent, what number do you use?
Around 3,500.
So you use that there are 3,500 members in total that you represent in DC 47?
No, we have 8 locals in District Council 37. 2 of them represent employees of the city of Philadelphia. And of those 2 locals, they represent more than the city of Philadelphia. They have parking authority members. They have housing authority members, First Judicial District. So I'm only talking about the city civil service employees in those locals is around 3,500.
That's 3,500, but I'm asking you for the benefit of the viewing public and my colleagues. When you talk about representing District Council 47 overall, with all of those different employees who work for different agencies that you referenced, what's the total number?
Around 6,300.
Okay, around 6,300. Okay, and just because we're trying to give the public a snapshot of what District Council 47's membership looks like just across the board. When you look at that demographic, what does that look like as it relates to race?
Entirely for District Council 47?
Yes.
I would say it's 70 to 75% African American and 25% other.
Okay, I thank you for putting that on the record, because that helps us get some context about this. And the reason why for me is because I'm struggling to understand that as our city has gotten more diverse, and we are a majority minority city, particularly when you talked about, and I want to be very specific, the pathologists, the pharmacists, and the librarians, they continue to be positions that people have come to, and believe me, I'm chair of City Council's Committee on Labor and Civil Service, so I'm the one who gets the letters from folks saying that there is not enough diversity in those areas. You know, how is it more difficult to hire from the populace, and what is the challenge with us seeming to find more diversity as it relates to those positions? Particularly those that you described as being very hard to fill.
Well, I don't think that there's enough money that is devoted to education with the city in trying to promote high school graduates to go into colleges that are in the city to get these kinds of degrees. It's very expensive. These are very expensive degrees to get because most of them require, all of them that you just mentioned require post-secondary education, and pathologists, for example, have many years of postgraduate school beyond getting their medical degree. So I think that there needs to be more emphasis in supporting minorities and women going into these positions, because it's extremely difficult for them to have the money to put into getting these educations. They have to rely on scholarships. And I think that the city could provide more scholarships for people who are interested in going into those fields.
So I thank you for your response, and I really do appreciate it. And the reason why I say it is because I appreciate you acknowledging that overall District Council 47 is a majority minority union. Its membership is that accurate according to what the demographic you just said? It's a majority minority union. So,
yes.
So District Council 47 is a majority minority union, and you have the great honor and privilege of serving as the leader of a majority minority union. And when we look at a union like District Council 33, that is also a majority minority, their members are frontline workers. They are paid less on the whole, when you compare what they're paid to DC 47 workers. And also, it's still currently the law. I mean, like right now, for any DC 33 worker to be a resident of Philadelphia for a year before working for the city. So I'm trying to understand why District Council 33 has no trouble recruiting workers under the parameters of the law, but even with the waiver process, that DC 47 is saying that it is having trouble. I mean, the flexibility, and I understand what you're saying. When you look at the pool of those who have a master's degree in library sciences, and Drexel University, according to your testimony, is the only institution that offers that degree. And you mentioned pathologists and pharmacists, that it's very hard. But with the waiver in existence, if we needed to recruit people in for that, we could just use the waiver process. Tell me why you think it's still a problem.
Well, the waiver process, my reading of this amendment was that it was going to make it more difficult to have the waiver process. I understand that there is a waiver process in the city charter, but if you're basically doing a one-year requirement, I think many people, will look at that and say, well, I'm not a resident for a year. I might as well not apply. I mean, people look at applications online. There isn't anything that says online other than you have to be a resident of the city of Philadelphia for 1 year. People, living outside the city who look at that will say, well, there's no point in me even applying because I'm not going to be considered. Where we do have a process, it's just that, I think as Mike Zaccagney was mentioning earlier, where yes, there is a process and yes, it can work, but that doesn't mean that everybody is aware of that.
Let me just note for the record that the waiver process, we've noted for the record, is adequate, and it addresses the need for us to, work towards getting people to those hard to fill job vacancies that require a special skill or an expertise that we don't believe is available in the city. I want to thank you so very much for your
testimony. Could I also add, Councilwoman, that there are some waivers for District Council 33 positions.
Let me, and listen, if they have acquired some waivers, that is why. I mean, I thank you for acknowledging that. Although their employees is currently the law for any DC 33 workers that they have to be residents of Philadelphia for a year before working for the city. But even there, if we needed, you acknowledge that if they've needed a waiver, to sort of, usurp the guidelines, even you just acknowledging that there's some 33 employees who have had to request waivers, you make my point that if we need to use the waiver process, it is available. So
actually, the requirement is only for laborers in the charter.
It's for laborers, and all of the laborers are members of District Council 33.
They are, but there are a lot more people beyond laborers that work for District Council 33, or that are represented by District Council 33.
The point that we make is that when a waiver has been needed and it needed to be accessed, the waiver process has been able to be accessed. So it's more than adequate to help fill those positions that we say are hard to fill. Let me just state for the record, before I move on to my next colleague, that when people talk about more broadly how this is a bad policy, I want us to keep in mind the following facts. We're talking about Philadelphia being the largest poor city in America. We're a majority minority city, and we've been talking for years about how we need to get our own residents into good family-sustaining jobs, and this is a vehicle to do such. Do we have any other colleagues who are interested in posing any questions or comments to members on this panel? Hearing none, thank you, Ms. Scott, for your testimony. We will also note that there is other testimony that has been provided that we will give to the stenographer to put on the record. Rachel, can you please call the next panel to testify on the bill? Oh, and Stephanie,
sorry.
When Rachel calls the next panel to come up, once they get up, just make sure you speak first. So Rachel, just call them.
Thank you.
There is no other panel on this bill.
All of the written testimony that we have is one from the Committee of 70. The other is from Chuck McQuilkin, who is the Vice President of IAFF Local 22. Stephanie, please provide the clarity to the record that you acknowledged earlier.
Sure. Well, Chairwoman, you actually took my one point of clarification, which I appreciated, that the residency requirements for exempts are the same for civil service employees. So we do have to live in the city within 6 months of hire. I also think you raised a really great point about HBCUs, the surrounding HBCUs. We've done a number of recruitment efforts to those surrounding colleges and universities. I will note, though, unless they are a resident of Philadelphia or have some tie to Philadelphia where they plan to move in, unless they're applying for a position that does have a waiver, we may be unable to kind of recruit them into some of the positions in civil service that might require the 1-year residency. And I also just wanted to note that there are HBCUs that do offer the Master of Library Science degree, and so part of our recruitment efforts will be focused on those schools as well. Again, as long as we do have the waiver for the librarians, I think we can certainly explore, other colleges and universities that offer that degree. So I just wanted to make those points for the record.
Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate you clarifying that for the record. And I want to say again, for the benefit of the listening audience, I am a proud graduate of Lincoln University. It's the first historically Black degree-granting institution of higher learning in the nation. I am also a certified secondary English teacher by profession. My undergraduate degree is in English and education. Councilman Curtis Jones, I was about 30 seconds away from moving to PG County in Maryland, because during our sophomore and junior years, the education department in PG County practically took up residence on the campus of Lincoln University. So when people often say, wow, there's surely a whole lot of educators, who graduated from Lincoln University that are not from Maryland, a lot of people from Philadelphia, from Jersey, from New York, who moved to Maryland to teach in PG County. And when people ask me, Sherelle, how do you explain that? Why aren't they teaching in Philadelphia? I often say to people, that is because PG County put the time, energy, and resources and spent them on Lincoln's campus when we were in our sophomore and junior years, so that by the time we needed to make the decision, we were well prepared and working through those residency issues. So thank you, Stephanie, so very much. Is there anyone else here to testify on the bill whose name that has not been called? Hearing none, Rachel, will you please call the first panel we have to testify this afternoon on bill number 200367 and resolution number 200377?
Vanessa Garrett Harley and Hans Manos.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilman Jones?
May I be recognized before the panel?
Sure, Councilman Jones.
So, first of all, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Those who are here to testify, thank you for your patience. Those who are listening on radio and also on Channel 64, thank you for paying attention. Before I say what I have to say, I want to state for the record that 99% of Philadelphia police officers protect and serve to the standard that we want to hold them to. So this commission is pretty much for the 1% that do not. I say that in knowledge of those individuals who graduate out of our training academy. I go every year, thanks to Sheriff Bilal, to go to a Scared Straight program to talk to those recruits, to talk to them about being a Philadelphian, being an African American, and some of the things that they should be prepared for and watch out for. So the Citizens Police Oversight Commission, represented in Bill number 200-367 and resolution number 200-377, is not an attack on them. This ballot measure is an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter. It is aiming for a November election to be ratified by the city and its citizens. This new commission will add to the city's list of independent commissions like the Zoning Commission and the Ethics Board and other commissions that do not have to worry about where their funding is coming from, do not have to worry about if the boss, whoever they may be, doesn't like their independent decisions, that they don't have to fear for their jobs and the future of their commission. It is also going to be allow the City of Philadelphia's City Council to determine things like who should be on that commission, what is the eligibility for members to be on that commission, and inclusive but not limited to having certain powers such as subpoena power, such as the ability to force or encourage people to testify, to be able to look in certain confidential or semi-confidential records, to be able to determine the history of individuals. This mission for this commission is to improve policing in the city of Philadelphia, to encourage certain behaviors and hold them to a higher standard, and as importantly, to respond to citizens' complaints in a timely manner and to be able to have them feel confident that they will be listened to and those issues will be resolved. The commission will succeed the current commission, but will be an orderly, I hope, transition, because there are good works that have been done by that commission. Just by way of background, the first executive order that created a commission was done in 1993, I believe by the Rendell administration. It was carried through with the Nutter administration for 8 years, but it was an executive order that did not have predictable funding, that could not be funded to its appropriate level. In some cases, there were 2-year waits before the time that someone submitted a complaint until there was a resolution. So I want to thank the President's office and President Darrell Clark for being bold before any pandemic, before any protest, before any of that, to pay attention to this commission and move it to the position that we see ourselves today, and make sure that it had predictable funding. That is something that our president insisted on. So I just want to point out that a lot of people out there in the public probably believe that when you're an elected official, you get a get out of jail free card, that you don't have to submit to some of the things. And I will only remind you of former State Representative Jewel Williams being in the back of a police car, handcuffed from the back in a embarrassing position because he walked up and questioned a stop that was in his district. I will remind you of my father, who was at the Reading terminal, and he was shopping at a meat counter, and he had filled up his bag, and a gentleman who was a white gentleman came up and picked up his bag and started walking away. He was a senior citizen. To a degree, my father thought it was funny because he couldn't run. And when the young man, the gentleman started yelling for the police automatically came over and looked at the situation and figured it was my father. This is not something I read about. This is something that I lived through. In addition, I can tell you about my first car ride while African American. I I chronicled the fact that I bought a hoopty and was pulled over and summarily embarrassed about that. I won't reiterate that. I could talk about my daughter, who at 4 a.m. in the morning was on the front page of the Daily News, got her door kicked in. And it shouldn't require you being the relative of an elected official for you to get courtesy, for you to get treated with dignity and respect as a taxpayer. There should not be justice by zip code. Because if I'm in Chestnut Hill, there's a whole different response to policing than in Southwest Philadelphia. I would only go on to say that State Representative Morgan Cephas used to work with us in my office. And she called me one morning in a panic talking about her sister who was coming home and was approached by an off-duty police officer. He was trying to make advances. She refused those advances. And long story short, she was put in the back of a police vehicle for over 12 hours in 90-degree heat until we found her. These aren't things that are national. These are things that are local. So it adds to all of the frustration that you see nationally. It's almost like that clarifying moment during Me Too, when women across this nation start saying to themselves, that happened to you as well? Or it happened to me over here? And there was a sea change that happened in behavior because of it. Well, we're at that point in time again. And we need to carpe diem, seize the moment, and make appropriate changes so that the citizens of Philadelphia, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and around the world have a degree of confidence that they are respected as taxpayers and treated as citizens of this country with dignity and respect. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Jones. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Helen Gim.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I am going to make a very brief comment in lieu of questions because I know we are tight on time for our committee. First of all, I want to thank the council sponsor for this important piece of legislation. For my colleague Curtis Jones for being so dedicated to this issue for so long, but also to our testifiers, especially to Mr. Manos, that what is before us is an opportunity to recreate an entity that you have led, over a period of time. And what I am going to be listening for and hopeful for is that we have a chance to do something big, to do something new, and to learn lessons from the past. This original advisory commission was created by a mayor's executive order. It had certain responsibilities and also some limitations. And so as council considers the recreation of this entity that has been, in existence for a while, I hope that what we have a chance to do and what we're setting out to do is to learn our lessons and to do something bigger than what we have done, to understand what we are constrained by before, so we do not have to be constrained by those things, and then to be really responsible and responsive. So, I will not be asking any questions. I look forward to moving forward on this because this legislation is necessary in order for us to even open up the possibilities of what we can do in the future. But this is an important moment, and I want us to take it as being something that in which everything is possible for us right now, and that whatever limitations that we had, we must know what they are so that we can correct anything that was wrong before, and that we can do so much better, both by the people who are in our employment, but also more importantly for the public that we serve. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our council sponsor.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gim. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to go on record on this bill, and I don't feel like I need to say a whole lot. There's been a lot that's been said in terms of the support for the bill, but I just wanted to say that for me, this is very, very simple. If you want to serve the citizens of Philadelphia, I do not think it is too much to ask that you live in the city of Philadelphia, and that that this is something that is quite simple and quite easy for me. If you want to be of service of Philadelphians, we are asking that you make a commitment to live in Philadelphia. And if that is too much, then we should find people who are willing to make that commitment. So I just wanted to really be on record and state that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Bass. Chair recognizes Councilmember Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Jones, Councilmember Kim, and others for your commentary regarding this legislation and the work we're doing here today in this regard. For me, I think I've given the story in perspective to colleagues and others of how I once was actually racially profiled while leaving the DA's office. And I think we need to have this type of level of accountability. It's important we have this not only for individuals around the city, but also for the police. I am the nephew of 2 police officers, one who went off to glory, another who was retired and went back to the family farm. So I've grown up with that perspective, but I've also grown up with the perspective of being an African-American male right here in the city of Philadelphia. And the other challenge I have is that I have a young son who is a teenager, who's also on the autism spectrum. And so for me, when we have conversations like the talk, it's even more challenging for me when I have a son who can't necessarily communicate like others can if he gets into a situation when he is out in the city of Philadelphia. And so we have a specific card in his book bag that says, my son's name, our contact information, and how to communicate with him. So I always have this challenge of having relatives who've been police officers, but also the concern and challenge that I have a son that if he happens to go into his bag, as we've instructed him to do, to get out his card because he can't really communicate like others, what that may happen. And we've had that conversation, my wife and I, we've had it with other parents who have children on the autism spectrum, especially that have Black men on the autism spectrum. So this is an important conversation. It's an important time to have this conversation, and I'm glad we're having this now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. Rachel, will you call the first panel? Because I see
Vanessa Garrett Harley and Hans Manos.
Okay, I see both Vanessa and Hans. Thank you. Good afternoon. You are connected. Please state your name for the record. And Vanessa, we can start with you. Feel free to proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Vanessa Garrett Harley. Good afternoon, Chairperson Parker and Vice Chair Councilman Green and members of the Committee on Law and Government. I'm Vanessa Garrett Harley, the Deputy Managing Director for Criminal Justice and Public Safety. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of Bill number 200367 and Resolution number 200377 that seek to amend the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter for the creation of a Citizens Police Oversight Commission and authorizes the City Council to determine its compositions, powers, and duties. If this measure is approved by City Council, a ballot question would be presented to the city voters in the November 2020 election. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all this afternoon. As a city and as a country, we're still reeling from the heinous murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And now we have to wrap our hearts and minds around the tragic shooting of Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta, a police officer involved shooting still under investigation. There have been many other controversial cases just like these, which we all feel fuel the overwhelming number of peaceful protests we see on our streets and across the country. Police violence and misconduct are among several urgent challenges we are battling against simultaneously. Of course, we continue to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic, along with the rising number of shootings and homicides in our city. All these issues have disproportionate impacts on people of color, particularly Black people, and highlight the long road to recovery, justice, and equality as we unpack the decades-long frustrations brought on by systemic racism. We simply cannot squander this opportunity for change. We cannot shy away from this turning point in history. Our residents continue to show courage and resolve in their call for reform, and we in the administration remain firm in our commitment to meet and exceed those expectations. That is why the administration supports strengthening the Police Advisory Commission by incorporating it into the Citizens Police Oversight Commission, thus creating an even stronger entity. Expanding this body's ability to analyze the policies and practices of the Philadelphia Police Department is another critical step towards us rebuilding trust between law enforcement and communities of color. The creation of the Citizens Police Oversight Commission will further our ability to improve the conduct of officers, boost the quality of internal investigations examining alleged misconduct, and increase transparency, allowing for greater communication between the community and police. This move underscores our shared belief that cities are at the forefront of change and must be the driving forces of reform, especially given the absence of leadership at the federal level. As you know, just last week I spoke before council discussing the administration's ongoing work in strengthening police accountability while calling for an end to the unconstitutional practice of stop and frisk. We also outlined how in 2019, officers conducted fewer pedestrian stops and frisk of individuals in the city of Philadelphia than during any other year since 2015. This program results from the Philadelphia Police Department's wide-ranging efforts to re-educate and retrain police officers on the proper constitutional standards for administering pedestrian stops. But our work does not end there. Anti-violence programming under the Philadelphia Roadmap for Safer Communities seeks to improve relationships between police and residents while also addressing the trauma that contributes to violence and connecting individuals and groups at the highest risk of violence to positive alternatives. We employ several evidence-based strategies to do this work, strategies that have been successful in many other major cities. We are committed to strong social services and supports needed to bring about safe and healthy neighborhoods, but constitutional community policing must also be part of that equation. By improving trust in law enforcement, holding officers accountable for their actions, mandating implicit bias training, and reviewing practices as part of a new Citizens Police Oversight Commission, we will strengthen our ability to better protect and serve every Philadelphian. I thank you for this opportunity, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Mr. Minos, you can state your name and please proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Hans Minos. I'm the Executive Director of the Police Advisory Commission. Thank you, Councilmember Parker and Councilmember Jones, for your and all members of the committee for your support during these trying times and for introducing this bill, and of course for the opportunity to testify regarding it. As you're aware, the residents of the city are echoing a global call for police accountability. Nationally, people were demanding justice for Rayshard Brooks, Eric Garner, Laquan McDonald, Botham Jean, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, Jamar Clark, Antoine Rose, Alton Sterling, Sandra Blend, and Breonna Taylor, amongst many others. Here in Philadelphia, our residents are demanding justice for Brendan T. Brown, Dennis Plowden, David Jones, Jeffrey Dennis, the victims of the Move bombing, and countless others who've had their rights violated or been treated impeccably. With the bills before today, the City Council is responding to the pain of the residents with real and decisive action. I applaud this leadership and pledge to support City Council as they move away from the tired rhetoric of police reform and replace it with a new system that residents can be proud of. For the last 3 years, the PAC has received feedback on its operations from city residents and from members of City Council. So we've seen a lot of support for our initiatives. Many people have expressed that this should be the policy work that we put forward should be an aspect of our work and not its primary focus. The feedback across the board has been that PAC should lead investigations into police misconduct, and that this is especially true for police use of force, officer courtesy, verbal abuse, and general misconduct. For highlighting the history of the PAC, so I'll skip that portion of my testimony because you've already done so, and I appreciate it. But currently we're operating with a staff of 7 people with a budget of approximately $540,000. This budget includes the staff salary, legal fees, staff training, materials and supplies, and outreach expenses. These structural problems make us helpless to respond to the residents and desperate to respond to residents desperate to have their specific complaint investigated and resolved by an entity that is civilian run. I want to highlight that Philadelphia is one of the 4 largest police departments in the nation. It joins New York, Chicago, Los Angeles as the other 3 large departments. However, our city offers the least amount of civilian involvement in their police department. Of course, with support from council and the residents, this will change. For additional context, when I say involvement, in Los Angeles, their police board serves as, operates the police department, and the police commissioner reports to them. So they set policy and practice for their police department. In New York City and in Chicago, they have civilian-led boards that have a budget tied directly to the police department's budget, garnering for those two boards somewhere between $16 and $19 million per board, and an average of about 180 employees, if not more. I think that Philadelphia can accomplish these goals, and if the PAC was offered these powers, they would be grounded by some core values. These core values would be service, equity, transparency, and justice. And we would do this by paying close attention to aggregate numbers and to track our own performance and to make every effort to improve outcomes. In my formal testimony, you'll see some of the charting and the attention we pay to PPD investigations of civilian complaints and what trends we've seen and how equity is affected in these trends. Specifically, some evidence that shows us that Black residents are more likely to have more than one complaint about officers. Officers who do have more than one complaint are more likely to have more than one complaint by Black residents. So it works in both directions. If the new Civilian Police Oversight Commission is formed, my recommendation to respond to Councilmember Gim, would be to structure it in a very detailed way. I would recommend a special investigations unit that would continue the current work of the PAC, that would do a lot of policy and practice work. I would recommend a misconduct investigation unit that would be the largest unit and would serve as the frontline investigators into cases of police misconduct. A community engagement unit. The PAC, the current PAC has struggled with a 7-person staff to fully engage the community and make sure that they know where we are, who we are, and how they can file complaints. That would change with appropriate resources. A data management unit. This unit would support the entire organization and ensure that data was infused in all aspects of decision making. We would have an audits unit to assess the work product of the Philadelphia Police Department by auditing any investigation that it led. Administrative prosecution unit. This unit could present any cases that the PAC investigators investigated to any disciplinary board. It would differ. It could supplant the current police department advocate, and it would be staffed with attorneys. And finally, a training unit. This unit would help train new staff and provide training to incoming staff. So this would help keep our staff fresh and aware of the best practices in the field. Of course, to accomplish this, in order to meet the needs of the residents of the city, the commission would need significant powers. Attached to my written testimony is a sample of some of the powers to be considered, and I look forward to discussing those in detail in the coming months. Additionally, funding for the Police Oversight Commission should be guaranteed. My recommendation would be at least 1.5% of the police department's budget. This would ensure minimum staffing needs can be met and would ensure independence while insulating the city from disproportionate increases or decreases in police budgets. In conclusion, as we have learned from many incidents of misconduct and police violence, police oversight is an integral part of public safety. Clearly, the City Council agrees or recognizes this is necessary and vital function and is committed to providing this safety mechanism to the residents of the city. The PAC staff and commissioners have unique insight and expertise into policing in this city, and we look forward to working with City Council and other leadership to craft a future for police oversight in Philadelphia.
Thank you both, Hans and Vanessa, for your testimony. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Maria Quinones-Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know it's been a long day, and I appreciate the robust conversations. These are all very, very important issues. I want to thank Councilman Jones. Both Councilman Jones and I served on the oversight, the police oversight post the Justice Department report that really spelled out all of the challenges that we had structurally in the police department. When you measure the 8 can't wait Philadelphia had met 7 of those 8. The last one missing, and I want to go to it because Hans brought it up, the issue of comprehensive reporting. And we all know that if it's not measured, it's not managed. So I want to get from both Vanessa and Hans, in a report of that magnitude where we really are measuring and managing, what are the 1, 2, 3 points that absolutely are key for departments to interface with the police department like both of you do on a day-to-day basis? And thank you so much for your service.
So if I understand the question correctly, what are the key data points that are necessary for public safety? Is that generally correct?
Absolutely. That should be readily available, simple for people to measure, monitor, review.
Yeah. So there's so many, and thank you for that really thoughtful question. One is that I would definitely say that we highlight the difference between complaints and findings. Policing is a very personal profession. We know car stops and pedestrian stops and other interactions are highly personal. Not a lot of witnesses sometimes, not a lot to corroborate a complaint. So while each individual complaint may not fully be founded, the concentration of many complaints on one particular person is an important data point as we consider things like early warning systems and discipline in the future. And specifically, if there's an officer who has many verbal abuse complaints, we're forced into a consideration. Are we saying that a bunch of residents who don't know each other all decided to pick on one officer? Or is there an officer who, despite the fact that there's not evidence in each investigation to maybe find him accountable, may, just by the volume of complaints, have an issue that we can address? So that is certainly one. I would say use of force incidents overall is a very important one, but I would take a step back from use of force data collection to understand how we're defining use of force. Very recently, the Police Advisory Commission forwarded a report to the police department requesting that they consider the pulling and or pointing of a firearm a use of force. Currently, that's not considered a use of force in this jurisdiction, but is in other jurisdictions. So our data is only as good as how we classify things on the back end. So I would say certainly identifying use of force, but also understanding what the use of force classification is for sure.
And would you include verbal in that? One of the things that we've seen lately with the videos is this really use of saying certain things that are threatening, potential use of force. Mm-hmm. How would you measure that?
So, it's a great question. So there's so many ways to measure that. And I think that I'll remind some folks of my 2018 now, it's been so long, body worn camera report, where we talked about how other jurisdictions are auditing their body worn camera video for exactly what you're referencing. Just a random audit where they randomly pull different officers' video and look for procedural justice. A fancy word for saying, how are you talking to people? How are you communicating with people? And are you likely to curse at somebody for no reason or otherwise make a threat for no reason? And are you effectively not de-escalating the way that the police department prefers for you to do? So there are jurisdictions. The most notable one is New Orleans, and I can send you their audits where they do exactly this. They try and measure for procedural justice by looking at different units and different districts, body-worn camera footage in a prescribed number. So they might say, and this is an example, we're going to do 30 hours of the 17th district to figure out in that 30 hours of video how procedural justice is going in that area of the police department. So that's one concrete way of measuring that we could do tomorrow.
Vanessa, briefly, thank you so much again for your service.
Absolutely. I would just say, as we're looking at things through a racial equity lens right now, is becoming increasingly important. You would also want to look at everything in terms of diversity in both the composition of the force, as well as potentially in those arrests and or stops that are being made, and measure them pretty concretely and consistently.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure, thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Jones, did you have any comments? Okay.
No, just thank you for your service, your thoughtfulness in difficult situations, underfunded, overwhelmed. You kept going. So thank you, and we look forward to your input going forward to help shape an appropriate way to restore the faith and trust of the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Chair Parker, if I may have another minute just to respond to Councilmember Gim's indirect questions about lessons learned and what we've been constrained by. I would just say that one lesson learned that we should highly consider is giving the PAC direct access and extraordinarily clear powers. I think some of the problems we've had have related to ongoing elongated debates about access to information. So, and those are two things that we could solve by, again, just giving us direct access to as much information as possible. I'm talking about databases and programs and clear powers that are beyond debate.
Thank you so very much. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee? There being none, thank both of you, Vanessa and Hans, for your testimony. We greatly appreciate it. Rachel, can you please call the next panel to testify on the bill and resolution?
Representative Donna Bullock and Senator Sharif Street, if he is still available.
While Senator Bullock and Senator Street are getting prepared to testify, let me just say a huge thank you, Representative Bullock and Senator Street, for all of the work you all have done on the state level to assist the city during this very trying time economically. When our revenue has been hit like something we would never have expected. But the reason why we don't have to make that terrible choice about increasing our real estate taxes is because you all worked very hard on the state level to ensure that the school district of Philadelphia was at least level funded. And that meant we didn't have to make that terrible decision. In addition to that, the rental assistance, the mortgage assistance, we know that doesn't happen. And assistance for particularly disadvantaged small businesses, that doesn't happen without the bulk of you. And we want to say thank you. Please state your name for the record, Representative Bullock, and please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Representative Donna Bullock, and thank you, Chairwoman Parker, for those kind remarks. You understand more than anyone the work that it requires at the state to get the kind of resources that our city needs. And so I want to thank you for your leadership, both at the state when you were our leader of the Philadelphia delegation, and now as a council member here in the city of Philadelphia and the chair of this committee. I'd like to say thank you as well to Councilman Curtis Jones and his staff and the other members of this committee for affording me the opportunity to address you this afternoon. As the state representative for the 195th Legislative District, vice chair of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, a member of the Police Reform Working Group, and perhaps more importantly, a former city council staffer, it is an honor to be in your chamber, albeit virtually. The current national focus on police violence has brought into focus long overdue review of policing and use of force in the United States. We have an opportunity to repair a broken relationship between police and community. In the wake of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Rayshard Brooks, local, state, and federal officials are responding to these acts of police violence with bold proposals to hold police accountable and to require transparency. The Police Reform Working Group is a group of state and city legislators, lawyers, and other community leaders who began reviewing and compiling proposals, many of which had already been on the table. A blueprint for police reform exists, though it is complex and is a complex and challenging patchwork of policy recommendations and legislation sitting in the committee in Harrisburg, or actions taken by individuals and collective police departments, municipalities, and states in response to the President's Task Force on 21st Policing or other police reform and accountability organizations. One such recommendation is to create or empower independent, well-financed, civilian-led, and managed review boards with subpoena and disciplinary powers to recommend internal affairs and criminal investigations per the negotiated disciplinary code. Earlier this month, Governor Wolf established by his own executive order an oversight commission to investigate alleged misconduct by Pennsylvania state troopers. Municipalities across the Commonwealth and in fact across the country are aggressively working to establish and refine existing civilian overboards. Why? Because the public has called for it. And experience has shown that strong, independent oversight boards can build legitimacy and public trust through increased police transparency and accountability. But poorly funded or weak, powerless oversight boards can have the exact opposite effect, further eroding the public's trust in law enforcement and elected officials. In Philadelphia, we already have a mechanism for oversight in place, our Police Advisory Commission. But the 30-year-old commission needs a serious overhaul and reinvestment. The Police Advisory Commission was born out of the hard work of the Coalition of Police Accountability in the early 1990s. And at the time, then Mayor Ed Rendell and City Council actually disagreed, forcing the council members to override the mayor's veto to establish the commission. The commission has since had checkered periods of visibility and adequate funding and overall effectiveness. To change that, to establish a more meaningful, effective, and responsive civilian police review board, it won't be easy. It will take time, it will take money, and it will take a whole lot of political willpower. The Civilian Oversight Board must be independent, fully funded, and staffed. It must have the authority to conduct contemporaneous, independent review of civilian complaints and use of force incidents. It must be insulated from police manipulation. It must be a trusted watchdog, and that watchdog must have bark. Councilman Jones' resolution and ballot measure to establish the Citizens Police Oversight Board is a step in the right direction. If we are going to replace the Police Advisory Commission and establish this new Citizen Oversight Board, there are models and professional standards to consider. In 1995, as a wave of citizen oversight agencies were being established across this country, mostly in response to the Rodney King incident, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, also known as NACO, was established as the nation's only professional association of organizations and individuals working directly in oversight. NACO has legitimized police oversight as a professional field of study and practice and facilitated the development of professional standards, including a code of ethics and core competencies and training guidelines for oversight practitioners. According to NACO, of the 18,000 police departments in the country, about 200 cities have oversight boards currently in operation. They are primarily associated with large municipal police agencies like Philadelphia, and they differ in size, responsibilities, and other ways. There are many structures to consider. There are a number of factors that can also contribute to the success of the review board. Independence, ample and effective authority, access to public officials, access to records and investigations, meaningful support from the administration, adequate resources and staff, strong mandates, strong authority and expectations, and community stakeholder engagement. There are also examples of cities who went through the same process that Philadelphia is considering at this moment, a complete overhaul of a failed or inadequate civilian review boards. Chicago has seen no less than 3 versions of a civilian review board. In 2007, the city established the Independent Police Review Authority to replace the Office of Professional Standards, a civilian oversight board that reported to the police department. The Independent Police Review Authority was viewed as more independent because it answered to its mayor instead. However, the structure, staff, and review process remained otherwise unchanged. After failing to effectively investigate police complaints, and if any at all, the U.S. Department of Justice released a scathing report, and the Independent Police Review Authority was then replaced again with a new civilian oversight agency, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, in 2016. The civilian office was set up to operate independently of both the police department and the mayor, and was appropriated the significant amount of funding. As a result, the civilian office has been more transparent and provides data on citizens' complaints and their adjudication. San Francisco's Office of Citizen Complaints, formed by ballot measure in 1982, was similarly plagued by periods of underfunding and manipulation by its strong connections to law enforcement. After 2016 U.S. Department of Justice assessment and public outcry, that office also saw many changes, and those changes were adopted, including the authority to investigate all police-involved shootings. In 2018, St. Louis gave their Civilian Oversight Board subpoena powers and enhanced minority participation on the board. In Washington, D.C., the Office of Police Complaints is successful in large part because of its independence from the Metropolitan Police Department. 4 of its 5 members cannot have any current ties to law enforcement. The office also has significant input from its city council, has access to police investigation records, including body camera footage, and regularly engages the community through outreach efforts. Denver and Phoenix have 2 of the strongest civilian oversight boards, with monitoring and investigative powers, as well as sanctioning and disciplining authority in some cases. No matter the past success of these review boards, many cities are considering additional rounds of changes to bolster their civilian review boards in light of our current events. Civilian oversight boards help build public trust. They hold police accountable and foster transparency, but they are not a silver bullet to police reform. Effective civilian oversight boards are critical and necessary, a very critical and necessary component to a larger police reform agenda. That agenda includes some of the recommendations of the Police Reform Working Group, the President's 21st Century Policing Task Force, and the work of many advocate-led groups in Philadelphia and across the nation. What we have learned is that a single incident of excessive force can shine a light on years of built-up public distrust and spark widespread demands for change. We also know it's not about just one incident. It is about the hundreds of civilians who are shot, injured, and killed by police yearly. It's about the years of corruption and police abuse. But it is also about that police officer who is risking their life every day, who is ethical, who performs their job with professionalism and care, and who is a part of our community. Policing cannot remain static. It must evolve, and the public is demanding that evolution happens now. With a civilian-led oversight review board that has subpoena authority, adequate funding and staff, access to public officials and local and state level at the local and state level, and with a coordinated response from the city and state to police reform, we have an opportunity, as Councilwoman Helen Gim has mentioned, an opportunity to do something here, an opportunity to create a watchdog with true bite. I would like to thank again Councilman Jones, the co-sponsors of this measure, and every member of the committee and city council for giving me the time to speak today. And I encourage you to consider this pivotal moment in history. Together, as elected officials, police, and residents, we can create an oversight board that can transform police-community relations for generations to come. Thank you again, Chairwoman Parker, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Representative Bullock and State Senator Street. We know that it's a little later than we expected, but we want to thank you, State Senator, for your patience. And I won't go through it all, but I want you to know that prior to Representative Bullock speaking, we gave you all much due respect and acknowledgement of your work at the state level for delivering for Philadelphia with rental assistance, mortgage assistance, and disadvantaged business assistance, and we thank you on the record, Senator. Please feel free to state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Sharif Street. I'm State Senator from the 3rd District, resident of North Philadelphia. I live in the 5th Council District. I'm pleased to testify today, and I want to thank Council for its work. I want to thank you all for beginning the work of reimagining public safety in the Commonwealth, in the city of Philadelphia. This is a part of a larger conversation we've been having about public safety in the Commonwealth. I want to thank my colleague, Representative Bullock, for her comments, and I won't repeat many of the things she said, but amen, and I second her comments. To truncate some of this, one, I think it is critically important, given what we've seen both locally in the Commonwealth and nationally, that we send a strong message about police reform. I think this measure, or the measures, because there are multiple measures in terms of strengthening the teeth of the citizens of the Citizens Review Board, I guess, strengthening, solidifying it as a charter function, and making its funding more certain, making it more independent and more accountable, and giving it greater power to review, to investigate concerns around policing, will increase the confidence of the average Philadelphian in what's wrong. And I want to say this. Look, we know that there are many, if not the overwhelming majority of police officers, go to work to do the right thing. But when you take your car to the shop, and they say, why are you here? You tell them what's wrong with the car. If you say, I have a tire that needs to be changed and it's broken, you don't say, I have 3 good tires, the engine's good, the carburetor is fine, the steering is fine. You don't enumerate all the things that are going well. You point out what needs to be corrected. And in this respect, council is doing an overhaul of our criminal justice system, and they're really reimagining public safety. I want to thank Councilwoman Parker for her very timely legislation requiring folks that police the city of Philadelphia to live in the city of Philadelphia as well. I agree that that's also timely legislation. I want to point out that transparency in policing is incredibly important. And this is not inconsistent with what we're doing at the Commonwealth, where we're talking, we're attempting to advance, we're considering legislation introduced by my colleague, Senator Costa, who is around a police accountability database that would allow police departments to know when hiring folks what their previous record are, and to dispel some of the panacea about whether you need oversight. There is information that only a governmental agency can access about one's prior record. So one could have worked in another agency, and you would need this board would be able to then look at the data of prior history when a person could have been living in another place, fired from the police department, and then wants to be rehired in Philadelphia. There need to be methodologies to make sure that you can examine what their prior record is, and if a person is terminated or needs to be terminated, what the full scope of their record is, not just what's happened in this instance. And I think this would help. Moreover, sort of connecting some of what was said earlier, the idea that people should live in the city also stops people from hopping jurisdictions from municipality to municipality. And we don't need to be hiring a police officer who maybe lived outside the city, did something wrong, and then comes to the city of Philadelphia and hired. This is not an insignificant incident. Antoine Rose was killed in the city of East Pittsburgh after an officer who was on the job just 7 hours had been fired from another police department, rehired, and because there was an appropriate review of the practices for hiring and discipline, and because there wasn't an appropriate database, and because you did not have to live in the jurisdiction in which you worked, he was able to hop from jurisdiction. So in many respects, these bills work together for council to have greater accountability and greater understanding of why people are testifying. And some of the perspective I think we can offer is the perspective of people who look at municipalities across the Commonwealth and what is happening. So I want to commend council for its reimagining of this. I think this is part of a larger discussion around policing. And I will say, because people always say when you testify on this discrete issue, that does not mean that we don't need to look at other issues. And I'm sure, and I know that you are, but issues like things that contribute to issues like what the scope of work police officers are doing are also relevant. There was a time in this city when things got too cold, you had police officers to try and get people off the streets for Code Blue. Then a council member working with the mayor, Councilman John Street, working with Mayor Ed Rendell, put in place what's now the sidewalk bill, where folks like, that's why people like Sister Mary and folks from One Day at a Time go out and get people off the streets in Code Blue, and police officers do that, so there isn't a confrontational experience when that happens. And that was another generations of councils reimagining how we dealt with policing. At the time, it was controversial, and the people thought, well, this is something the police have to do. We now believe that the services to Sister Mary and groups like One Day at a Time provide during Code Blues are essential. I think you will find that the original executive order and then legislation creating today's citizen review board were met with opposition, but people now believe that it should be even stronger. Our process in making a more just city is an evolutionary process, and I commend council in moving us along the way. And how you re-examine public safety. I encourage you to re-examine it in a broad way, to think about it as a part of the scope of what you overall do. When you think about what goes on in our schools, in our communities, and how we do it. And I think most poignant on this point was Councilman Jones's point about the fact that police officers continue, even when off duty, to provide a modicum of additional service when they're just walking around the community. I served as outside counsel to the sheriff of Philadelphia for 5 years. And during that time, I had the experience to know that sheriff deputies, many of whom lived in the city, when they were off duty, would still provide a certain measure of comfort to people, knowing that you had a sheriff deputy on that block, knowing that you had persons in law enforcement. The presence of people who are involved in law enforcement, who are moving around communities, even when they're off duty, provide a modicum of safety. And finally, I'll conclude with this. I had a young man come into my office today, a resident of North Philly, a young father in his early 20s, who said to me, why can't you all figure out a way to have the people that police us be from the communities where they can recognize the person who is doing something wrong and who needs to be policed, and a person who is just engaging in something that is normative behavior in our communities. And he moreover suggested that normative behaviors in Philadelphia, in North Philadelphia, where he lived, where he was born and raised, and where he was raising his young child with his fiance, that normative behaviors here might look a little different than what they look like in other parts of the state or the country, and that a person's having a chance to have lived in our community, lived in our city, would therefore be in a better position to recognize who is actually doing something wrong and who is doing something right. And moreover, he said, why can't we have a process where people in the community can have some say about whether officers are exercising that discretion in a reasonable way? Those weren't his exact words, but that was the point. And he wanted two things: people to live in the community, and two, that people in the community would have some ability to monitor and control the people that were policing them. And he thought it was an absurd thing that old folks like us, and we now get to be old folks, that we didn't get it. And what I explained to him, not only did the members of City Council get it, but in fact, I was scheduled at that time. I told him about 30 minutes, but that was about 3 hours ago. 30 minutes, I was going to be speaking to members of council about these very issues, and that the City Council of Philadelphia did understand. So some of the rhetoric that people are out there protesting about is, in fact, completely consistent with what council is doing. And they may express it in a different language. They may talk about community patrols, but all they really want is people from their neighborhoods to patrol the community and the police not to be outsiders to the community. And they talk about, we need accountability, but what they really want to know is that people understand what's going on. And when they talk, and they want to know that when something wrong is done, that the people who are making the decisions about whether something wrong, the police are policing themselves, that there is a community input. And this young man recognized the fact that we needed police. But he said we can't have a lawless society. But he recognizes how we did policing had to change and be a little different. So I encourage you to continue with this strengthened police advisory commission. I encourage you in your efforts to make sure that we have police officers living in the city. And I encourage you to continue to reimagine policing in overall and what the role of police are in our society. They certainly are needed, and we certainly thank them. But it is part of a larger picture of how we deal with criminal justice, how we keep our communities safe. And I thank you for your role. And to the extent that we in the Commonwealth can be helpful, we look forward to it. I will note as a commercial, we do plan on, I do have legislation. I think we're going to have movement to ban chokeholds. But I think we at the state and those in the city, we really do have to listen to what people are saying to us. We have to reimagine public safety. And both measures I've heard today are great steps in that regard. I thank you. And that concludes my testimony. I stand ready for questions.
Thank you so very much, Representative Bullock and State Senator Street. Are there any comments or questions from members of the committee? Chair recognizes Councilmember Jones.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for being our partners. We get to propose legislation among people that are not from another planet, if you would, and they kind of have to travel through the same streets and see the same conditions. You get to go and deal with people who might not see an urban African American for a year up close and personal and not understand some of the things that they go through. So thank you, Senator, and thank you, Representative. In my closing is that I saw a video on, I think it might have been Good Morning America. There was a young man, similar to the young man you were talking to. He was playing basketball in his driveway. When the police car came down the street, he hid behind his father's car until the police car passed him. His father caught it on film, recorded by his security system, played it back and looked at it twice, and then asked him, "Why did you hide from the police officers?" He said, "Because they might shoot me." We have to restore the trust and faith that we're not sending warriors, but guardians and people who are there to protect and serve. So thank you, Senator, for your patience. I know you got a lot of work to do, but it was worth waiting for.
Thank you, Councilman Jones. Chair recognizes Councilmember Green. We can't hear you, Councilman Green.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, sorry, we're doing the unmute challenges. But want to say to both Senator Street and Representative Bullock, thank you for your advocacy in Harrisburg. I have to say this is probably one of the first times that we've had this level of collaboration at the local and state level and also federal level on a lot of these issues. I have to commend my colleague and Majority Leader Sherelle Parker for helping to put together a lot of those calls in the early part of COVID-19 to have a lot of different conversations regarding issues initially dealing with COVID-19, and that's been able to transform into this issue regarding the unrest that's happening in our city and our state. And I know from the work in reference to some of the arbitration legislation we're trying to get done, and I'm just curious, what has been the perspective from some of your colleagues in Harrisburg, both on the House and Senate side? I know there's been some movement and some leadership that the House has taken in reference to kind of taking over the chambers, and I know the Senate side, Senator Street, you've also been working very hard in that regard. So we're doing a lot of what we can at the local level, but there's things that we can't do that have to be done at the state level. I'm curious, how is that moving?
So, I don't know if Representative Bullock is still here. I'll let her go talk about the House, and then I'll follow.
Sure. Thank you, Representative Bullock. As you know, members of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus had taken over the Speaker's rostrum last week, and it had helped move along some bills through committee. And in regards to the arbitration, there is a bill that I am working on closely with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Russ Diamond and several other members. There's an active draft right now. There seems to be some interest on both sides of the aisle, although I would say that not all members, regardless of party, are supportive of any revisions to arbitration. So we're treading carefully to make sure that we are looking at how we can reform arbitration in a way that addresses concerns of the public, while also respecting the values that we have in labor. And so that's something we are working on now, and hopefully we can have something that has some bipartisan support move through the House in the upcoming weeks.
So, so in the Senate, we didn't have quite the dramatic. We didn't have quite that opportunity for the dramatic statement that the House made around. But fortunately, the Senate Law and Justice and Judiciary committees are holding joint hearings. There's two separate committees in the Senate, Law and Justice one, Judiciary is another one, are holding joint hearings that were most of the day today. I'm not on either of those committees, although I am on the Sentencing Commission. I'm not on either of those committees. They're holding hearings most of the day today and most of the day tomorrow on issues around criminal justice reform, specifically looking at some of the issues around policing. And I imagine that will be one of the bills, one of the topics for which parties can offer testimony. And so I don't specifically know what the appetite is for the House bills. I don't think there's a bill pending in the Senate to change the arbitration system. But one thing that there was significant discussion about was not just the topic of whether we use arbitrators or whether we use an arbitration system, but how are the arbitrators themselves selected, and why is it that people feel like we can't get arbitrators in those roles who are responding in a more effective way. And so we're having conversations both with colleagues, but also with the Wolf administration about what the real process is around the arbitrator selection. I'm not exactly sure what we can do in that space, but what I will say is I think we have to look at it from both perspectives, both the arbitration process and then the arbitrator selection, because in theory, arbitration shouldn't be so bad. It's really supposed to be an expedited quasi-judicial process for dealing with proceedings and have them not draw out. But the arbitrators should be using the same level of dispassionate, unbiased review as judges, as we would expect from judges. And to the extent that the public doesn't feel the arbitrators or evidence doesn't demonstrate that arbitrators are as independent, dispassionate, and unbiased as judges, I think we need to not look at not just whether we go through arbitration, but perhaps we could have an arbitration process if we had a process for screening, vetting, and selecting arbitrators that yielded a better quality arbitrator. So I think we should look at both sets of issues, and I'm certainly open to it and awaiting whatever legislation comes out the House.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Street and Representative Bullock.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. Are there any more questions or comments from members of the committee? There being none, I want to say again, thank you, Senator Street, for coming back to join us. Senator Bullock, Representative Bullock, thank you so very much for staying with us in your testimony. Rachel, please call the next panel to testify on the bill and resolution.
Minister Rodney Muhammad and Mary Heenan.
Minister Muhammad and
Yes.
Ms. Heenan? Okay, great, you're here.
Yes, can you hear me?
I just heard Minister Muhammad. Is Ms. Heenan here, Mary Heenan?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so thank you both so very much for being here. Please state your name for the record. We'll begin with Minister Muhammad and proceed with your testimony.
Okay. I'm Minister Rodney Muhammad. I'm the minister of the Delaware Valley, covering a number of cities, and I'm also the member of Mosque number 12 here in the city of Philadelphia and president of the Philadelphia branch of the NAACP. I first want to thank you, Councilman Jones, for inviting me to testify, and I want to thank you, Councilwoman Sherelle Parker, chairing this convening. I have listened to this in its entirety, so I'm going to do my very, very best in the brief comments, not to be redundant, because too many important things have already been said. I think a question raised by Councilman Green helps me to segue into a point I wanted to make that I didn't want to forget, because good laws, history has taught us, have been tossed out because the right people weren't there to execute those laws. And sometimes people confuse the person's inability to really execute a good law with the law being good in the first place. So, you know, as we look for an oversight committee, I'm listening to Senator Street. We've got to file down and look at the type of individuals that go in to execute a commission that's going to really have teeth, making sure that we got folks on that commission that are willing to bite with those teeth if it's necessary. One of the things that I've learned, and I'll get into that, about 30 years of my life living here in the city of Philadelphia, but, you know, being a baby boomer, you start out as a child knowing how to use a rotary phone, and you're blessed to still be alive when the iPhone comes out. And there's a lot of history in that between just those two phones as tools. But being a baby boomer, you know, one of the things that we used to watch on television as a child was the Andy Griffith Show. The Andy Griffith Show was about a sheriff and his deputy. And one of the things you know about the Andy Griffith Show is that you figure they both went through some training to become a sheriff and or deputy. But in there, as you watch each series, when you review back on it, you know, this guy hardly ever carried a gun. He was already mentally poised to de-escalate a situation that he would find in the town of Mayberry. But his deputy, Barney Fife, was always hyped up, always wanted to have a gun on him, didn't seem satisfied till he could pull every gun and toy they had on the rack off. And oftentimes in the program, Andy Griffin would have to de-escalate his deputy, who was all revved up to go out and start firing bullets with the guns that they have. And of course, it's a comedy. But when you look at this situation we're in that's not really comical, you can see the type of mindset too often we have on the police force. And Andy Griffin was a good officer, and his good showed by de-escalating one that could have been a bad one. We have too many good officers, but the goodness is not good enough to stop the bad ones. That's why we're having this conversation today. And so I just wanted to note that I am for residency. So I agree with Bilal Qayyum, Shahad Ali, Joanne Bell, and others about residency. I think you should have skin in the game. If you're going to work for government in Philadelphia, if you're going to service Philadelphia's citizens, one of the things you ought to do is live in the city. And you have people who
live outside of the city too often. I just think they don't have enough, they can't have enough interest in a place that they don't live in. They just work there, and that tends to be the limit to their real mental, emotional involvement. When you don't know a lot about people, those areas of unknown create unfounded fears, but they're fears nevertheless. And when a person has a gun and a badge to use that gun, coupled with their own personal fears, too often you get this failed experiment. So when George Floyd was killed, when protests started in Philadelphia, we sent a press release from the NAACP to the press that we feel that having white police officers deployed, assigned in identifiably black neighborhoods that are especially disadvantaged is a failed experiment. And where we can, we need to move immediately to redeploy white police officers from these areas until there's some greater therapeutic reach to help in this situation, because while a white officer too often gets a few demerits on his records, we have to take people to the morgue and hold a funeral. And so that is our position on that. I do think that the oversight committee is necessary, but too often these committees fail in their duty because they're not empowered enough. They're not endowed enough with the kind of funding and things that they need. So we're going to do everything we can to get behind it. I represent the only community in the city of Philadelphia that is completely unarmed with carnal weapons. We don't keep guns, we don't carry guns, and it's not our way. So when we go out in the community, which is just as dangerous for us as it is for any other citizen, we go out with a moral imperative. We go out to work in a community with love and drawing on something that's greater inside the people who reside there than the average police is looking for. And so I finish with one point. I, too, like Councilman Jones, get an opportunity to go and spend a few minutes with police cadets. And I try my best to remind them that before they get assigned, that they're going to probably be assigned to a neighborhood in Philadelphia where they're going to go in with a mindset to look for criminals and to look for crimes. And I try to remind them the area that you have been assigned, called a identifiably black or Latino neighborhood, too often is already a crime scene. But they're not trained to look for those kind of crimes, so they're not trained to look for those kind of criminals. But if you're assigned to a neighborhood with decayed housing that too often results from bank denials, redlining, if you go there and see people who are academically more impaired than they should be on levels to operate in any way in this country to generate a living wage for yourself and your family, these failed schools and this substandard education, that's a crime, but nobody's going to jail for that. High illiteracy, which we're fighting. There's about a little over 200-something thousand adults in the city of Philadelphia that can't fill out an application for a job. Food deserts, and people have their children, if they're not getting something from the schools, trying to raise children on almost junk food. Then a steady supply of drugs, guns, and folks with a damaged self-concept. It's a recipe for delinquency. It's a recipe for antisocial behavior and even crime that's being breeded. And so too often these officers are going in our neighborhoods not necessarily trying to pick out a criminal from the regular resident here, not, as Senator Street said, not necessarily looking for who's doing wrong and who's not doing wrong. Too often, they have criminalized the whole lot of us, and that's what you call profiling. I'm for a change of laws, but I know that laws don't change conditions. We have to go after conditions. Dr. King said it even. The law can't make a man love me. Religion and education must do that. He said, but the law can keep him from lynching me, and I think that's pretty important too. So he knew that he was fighting a change of law, but he knew that there were conditions behind the law. We tend to go back to the root of how we started in this country. It started with an idea of white was supreme. That's how they treated the red man. That's how we were brought here for another whole reason than the things we're fighting for right now. And these 13 little colonies that were populated with that kind of attitude, when attitudes harden, they produce belief systems. Those belief systems are supported through an educational system and religion. And then ultimately you take your beliefs and you codify them into law. And so I represent a people that were first written into this Constitution and its articles as 3/5 of a man, not a whole man. And then we had to begin to fight for manhood. Even today, trying to define it for ourselves and not have someone else define it for us. So we are behind that residency rule. We are behind having a strong oversight committee. But I want to say that with the residency rule, I have watched in the city for nearly 30 years a robust cadre of young, bright minds graduating from some of the best schools in this country. But because we can't get adequate employment in the private sector, many of these young people move away from the city of Philadelphia, reducing our skilled labor pool. And everybody's not going to graduate from college and get a job with the government. So we have a big fight on our hands. And in 2010, the NAACP and National Action Network and the Urban League came to a memo of understanding with Comcast to work toward diversity. Comcast has done a lot better since 2010, but we're not where we really want to be. But that's only one corporation. What do we do with all these other corporations that are here? Because you're not going to get all of your graduates into government, but we have a private sector here that I'm sure is pulling people from other counties to fill many of their positions. Some of that could come from some of our young people graduating from many of these schools right in the city of Philadelphia to provide us with future work for the government here. So I thank you all for allowing me to have a few words with you.
Thank you, Minister Muhammad, for your testimony. And before Ms. Mary Hennon states her name for the record and proceeds with her testimony, for the benefit of all of our members, just want to note for the record that Council President Clark is well aware that our hearing is still moving forward. We have just 3 more people to testify and only 2 bills that we need to get through. So you don't feel rushed or pressed as it relates to time. Ms. Hennon, will you please proceed with your testimony?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Council.
Can you make sure he gave us that testimony in writing? Because some of that I'm going to use.
Oh, yes.
The Andy Griffith thing. Yeah. All right.
We'll get that, Councilman Jones. That was before my time, so I definitely need to read it too, Councilman Jones. Ms. Hennon, thank you so much for your patience. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good evening, Mary Hennon here. Thank you, Council President Clark and Chair Parker, committee members, and the PAC for inviting me to testify today. My name is Mary Hennon. I've been a public defender at the Defender Association and a Philadelphia resident for 6 years. I'm testifying today to support Council's proposed ballot initiative to create an independent police oversight commission.
But I'm also here to emphasize to everyone that it is not enough to create an independent commission. It must be funded to the city's maximum capacity and given the power necessary to hold PPD accountable and effect real change to its practices. When people think of police harm, they think most often of physical abuse. But my story will show you how something as simple as not filling out paperwork puts Philadelphia citizens in danger of police violence. I filed a complaint with PAC from an incident that started back in February when the police courtesy towed my car. I don't use my car every day like a lot of people are missing until a week or so after the police moved it. There was a restricted parking sign that had been torn up and thrown on the street, so I figured out right away the police must have moved it. I called the 18th district and asked them if they towed the car. The district said it had no record of my car being towed or of any towing that happened on my block for the whole month of February or before. They told me the only way to get help finding my car was if I called 911 and reported it stolen. Just in case, though, the next day, after reporting it stolen, I did go out and I looked for my car, and I found it 3 blocks away from my house, and it was ticketed by PPD specifically for courtesy towing. I called 911 again, and I reported the car found. But being a lawyer, I knew that I should keep all of those reports, because the last thing I wanted to do was get arrested for driving my own car. Now, fast forward 3 months. A friend and I are driving to visit his brother and his sister-in-law at the Jersey Shore. Just mere blocks from his house, 4 SUV cops in what looked like full tactical gear blocked us in on a dead-end street. They pointed their tasers, their guns at us. It was too scary to even process at that point. They screamed at us to get out of the car with our hands up, to back towards them, not look them in the face, and then they immediately handcuffed us both and took us to the side of the road. They searched my friend right away. They searched the car. I'm a lawyer and I have a cool head and a thick skin, but I was terrified. I was shaking. When they told me that the car was stolen, I explained the situation to them right away. I even told them that I had the police report in the glove compartment of the car. And of course, they had my license and my registration and they could verify all the information. But they kept us handcuffed on the side of the road for an hour before they were able to verify my story and let us go. Even though they had all the reports, they had the registration information, they kept us handcuffed there, scared and terrified because they didn't believe me. And I cannot emphasize one point enough, which is that I did everything that PPD told me to do. I kept all the reports, I did my diligence, and I couldn't avoid this traumatizing and humiliating experience. But let me tell you about my experience with PAC. I filed my complaint as soon as I returned to Philadelphia. PAC was thoughtful, diligent, and concerned. They called me within hours of filing. They double-checked all the information to make sure they had everything they needed to fill out a complete report. They responded to every question or request I had after the fact. And this was all while working with a reduced staff and from home. But in my conversations with them, I could tell there was a hint of pessimism in my conversations because there was this understanding that while they cared deeply about what happened to me and that they wanted to see something happen, some consequences, once this got into the hands of internal affairs, they might just look at it like it was a paperwork issue or even just a simple mistake. But when we talk about police accountability, we're not talking about individual mistakes or bad apples. We're talking about needing to oversee an entire system that subjects everyday citizens to violence and danger. So much of the current process is designed to shield the police from oversight. They're almost certainly guaranteed to keep their jobs for violations much more serious than not writing down where they towed a car. The district attorney's office gives us information as defense attorneys that the police involved in our cases have been complained against or disciplined, and then those same district attorneys do everything in their power to make sure we cannot introduce that evidence to a jury or a judge. So what's the point of the current process? It barely holds police accountable in the moment, and it's designed to prevent future accountability. So it's not create an independent commission. You've heard everyone tell you today, and I will say it myself, it needs to be strong. It needs to be funded in the way that other cities fund their commissions and the police budget. That way, the bigger your police force is, the bigger your commission is. It needs to have independent subpoena power and the ability to conduct its own meaningful investigation. The commission needs the strength to match the level of force police used against me and countless others who suffered much worse. It needs the strength to match the force of internal affairs and the FOP. But that can't happen without real money and meaningful investigative power. The people who work at PAC are dedicated and capable, and they care about protecting citizens, but they need our support and they need council's support. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so very much for your testimony, Ms. Hennon and Minister Rodney Muhammad. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee? There being none, thank you so very much for your testimony, and we appreciate your patience here today. Rachel, can you please call the first panel we have to testify this afternoon on bill number 200370?
Christopher Puhalski and Allison Cohen.
Christopher and Allison, welcome. We see you. Christopher, we'll start with you. So when both of you proceed, just state your name for the record, and please feel free to proceed with your testimony. Thanks. Good afternoon, good evening, Chair Parker and the committee members. My name is Christopher Puhalski. I'm the Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives at the Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability. And I'll just say, as I've been listening to your deliberations and the testimony, I'm truly humbled to come and present on my bill after all the weighty topics that you all have been dealing with today. And I think I'm truly not trying to butter you up here, but that the residents of Philadelphia would be glad that there is, if they all knew that there's careful deliberation of these really important issues. So as a resident, I'll just say that. Pleased to appear before you today on Council Bill 200370. This bill authorizes the City of Philadelphia through the Managing Director's Office to enter into a concession agreement with Bicycle Transit Systems for a concession to operate, expand, and finance the Indigo bike sharing system. I'd like to thank the bill's sponsor, Councilmember Kendra Brooks, for support of this project and her continued commitment to provide city services with equity and dignity. And I'd also like to thank the co-sponsors of the bill. Otis is pleased to be working with Bicycle Transit Systems, a Philadelphia-based company that has been responsible for building and operating Indigo bike share program over the last 5 years. Throughout this time, Bicycle Transit has provided excellent service to the City of Philadelphia as a contracted operations company, and we believe that the term sheet presented to the committee today represents a significant benefit to the city, residents, workers, and visitors. Over the past 5 years, Indigo program has expanded from 60 stations and 600 bikes to more than 140 stations and 1,400 bicycles. More than 3.5 million trips have been made on Indigo to date, and we just had our 5-year anniversary. We're particularly proud of the role that Indigo has played during the current crisis. Indigo has provided socially distanced transportation during the entirety of the COVID-19 crisis, allowing low-income Philadelphians in particular to access work and essential services. While other systems across the country shut down, Indigo operated continuously throughout the recent civil unrest. And on June 6th, the day when there was a massive rally on the Parkway where Philadelphians from all walks of life gathered to say that Black Lives Matter, Indigo had its 4th highest ridership day ever. So whether it's attending a civil rights rally, getting to a medical appointment, going to work, or just getting some exercise, Philadelphians have come to rely on Indigo. I know we're a little late, so let me do some summarizing of the next bit of my testimony. You have it in written form. Bicycle Transit was selected through an RFP process. We had 6 bidders. We did demos with 3 of them. We went into pre-contract discussions with 2, and we ended up selecting Bicycle Transit for 2 reasons. I'll call it value
and values. Bicycle Transit's offer had the highest monetary value of any of the bids that we received. But more than that, it's values. Allison's company, her and her entire team had the kind of shared values that not only the administration has, but that I think a lot of members of council have, about a commitment to equity, to diversity, to inclusion, to battling climate change, and providing low-income Philadelphians and all Philadelphians and visitors with convenient transportation. The details are in the term sheet. I'll also say that Bicycle Transit Systems executed an economic opportunity plan that requires a best in good faith effort to achieve MBE and WA participation goals of 7% for each category, and that was the highest of any of the offers that we received. This EOP will continue the workforce diversity goals, which have already been achieved under the current operating contract. Bicycle Transit is a national women-led firm headquartered here in Philadelphia and currently employs more than 50 people in Philadelphia, approximately 35 of which work every day on the Indigo system. So with that, we respectfully request that the committee report Bill 200370 out of committee, and that the council rules be suspended to allow first reading of the bill at the next session of council. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and I'm joined by Aaron Ritz, the Indigo Program Manager for Otis, and James Kellett of the Law Department, who can answer any law and contract-related questions you have.
Thank you, Christopher. We appreciate your testimony, and stand by. We'll hear from Allison Cohen now. Allison, just state your name for the record, please, and proceed with your testimony.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, good evening, Chair Parker and the committee members. My name is Allison Cohen. I'm the president and CEO of Bicycle Transit Systems. I've lived in Mount Airy, section of Philadelphia, for 11 years in the 8th Council District. I grew up here in Philadelphia. My wife and I have owned our house in Mount Airy since 2009, and we have a rising second grader and 2 rising kindergartners at our neighborhood school, Houston Elementary. I'm honored to appear before you today regarding Bill 200370 about the concession contract of which Chris just spoke to expand and operate Indigo. First of all, I want to thank Council for recognizing that bikes and bike share are core to providing transportation to all Philadelphians and key to helping the city recover from the COVID pandemic, and hence hearing this bill in this very crowded and very important summer session. Except for the few of you whom I've had the privilege to meet and even show you my headquarters here in Philadelphia, you've probably never heard of myself or my company, Bicycle Transit. Bike Transit, based here in Philadelphia, has quietly and behind the scenes powered growth, innovation, and equity in bike share here in Philadelphia and across the U.S. for the last 5 years. We operate bike share systems in Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas. Bike Transit has 130 employees nationwide, including over 60 here in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia employees both operate Indigo, lead our core company functions, and we run a 16-hour-a-day, 7 days a week, 365-day-a-year call center for 15 bike share systems across the country. Bike Transit has been the contracted operator to the city since inception in 2015 for Indigo. The successful partnership with Otis, with Independence Blue Cross, the Better Bike Share Partnership, and many other stakeholders has led to results that we are all deeply proud of. As Chris mentioned, Indigo has been a true transportation system that has provided over 3.5 million rides in 5 years. Indigo is a national leader in bike share for accessible and equitable bike share, with over 30% of our riders identifying as Black or Latinx and 45% of our riders as low income. Indigo is a resilient transportation system that is there when Philly needs it. As Chris discussed, our system stayed open during all of the recent Black Lives Matter protests when many other bike share systems such as Washington, D.C., Chicago, and New York closed. Our system has stayed open throughout the COVID pandemic and has been highly used by essential workers as SEPTA greatly decreased service. In fact, the low-income access pass has had increased ridership since COVID, when all other rider classes have decreased. We've also been there during the Pope visit, the SEPTA strike, blizzard, floods, and everything else you can imagine. We've been there. The Indigo stakeholder team has been built on strong relationships that have proven positive and resilient through a turbulent 5 years here in Philly, in the micromobility industry, and in our country. To date, the city has taken the financial responsibility for launching, growing, and operating Indigo, with Bike Transit as a contracted operator. With a new concession contract, Bike Transit will take on the responsibility to expand and operate Indigo for the next 10 years. The only major area where Indigo has fallen short to date is that with only 140 stations and 1,400 bikes, it's simply not large enough to truly serve all Philadelphians. Under this contract, we're committing to expanding the system to 3,500 bikes and 350 stations across Philadelphia at no cost to the city. The expansion, starting in 2021, will be distributed and expanding to new areas and densifying the core system to be able to accommodate the new neighborhoods. The bidding process was a competitive one. It was not just handed out to the local champion. We beat out tech giants, Uber and Lyft, and others with an offer that includes more than $19 million in capital investment, up to $500,000 a year of support to the city, which is crucial to the system's success. Bikes and bike share are a key aspect in enabling the economic recovery of Philadelphia from the COVID pandemic. And this is a role that we're seeing bikes playing in cities all over the world. As communities have reopened in China, Europe, and elsewhere, people are utilizing bikes and bike share as socially distanced, reliable, and healthy means of transportation to get back to work and for older children to get to school. I encourage you to call on Otis and to myself and my company to consider further ways which bike share can support the city's needs during the recovery. Finally, I want to share for a moment about myself and our company and our commitment to Philadelphia and to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. While living in Mount Airy, I launched bike share systems in Washington, D.C., Boston, and New York. I left that company and started Bike Transit with a sole mission to win and run Philadelphia, and to start a company that not only was an incredible operations company, but that I could control the values under which we operated. Since just after startup, Bike Transit has intentionally attacked diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice head-on and created internal systems and processes to include equity in everything we do. Currently, the demographics of our company include, in leadership, 31% female leadership and 54% minority leadership. And our overall workforce is 36% female and 50% non-white. That's what I mean when I say minority. We will continue always to examine and re-examine how we can deconstruct white privilege and power within our company and within our bike share systems. We will continue to create a just working environment for our employees and utilize bike share as a tool to fight for mobility and economic justice for Black people and other people of color in Philadelphia. Thank you to the bill's sponsor, Councilmember Kendra Brooks, and the entire committee for support of this project. I respectfully ask that the committee move Bill 200370 forward for City Council approval. Thank you so much for your time and consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
So Allison, thank you so very much for your testimony. You as well, Christopher. Allison, I want to have you state for the record, when did you say you bought your house in Mount Airy?
2009.
So you bought your house in 2009. I am proud to note for the record that I was your state representative when you purchased your house. So you made a good investment. And while I don't have any questions for you, as an African-American woman who has lived a life in skin that I don't have the luxury of taking on and taking off, I watch very carefully the people I see, particularly that we watched over the past few weeks as we look back on the civil unrest. But I watch those who have been saying that Black Lives Matter. And I watch very carefully through that lens. And it's really interesting that some folks say that Black Lives Matter until it comes time to talk about the sharing of real power and ownership and in wealth and economics. So I wanted to say to you, one, thank you for putting your investments and sharing in the wealth and the power of your business. And you've done it not just as a woman-owned firm, but a diverse firm, both with your employees and your executive board. Yes, we did our homework. Your locally grown firm, and you successfully expanded nationally. You continue to grow. You talked about weathering COVID. And if my grandfather were alive, he would say that he was the person that taught me to always root for the underdog. And so when I found out that you did outbid the big guys, right? I was real pleased to hear about that. So I want to say thank you very much. And I see that Councilman Green has a comment, and if any other members of the committee have comments, please queue up via chat. And Councilwoman Kendra Brooks has asked to be recognized after all members of the committee have spoken. Chair now recognizes Councilmember Green.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I want to thank my colleague, Councilmember Kendra Brooks, for sponsoring this legislation. I was honored to co-sponsor. I want to thank Chris for the work that he does, and Allison for the great work you've been doing as an entrepreneur. You must have gone to an outstanding university, maybe somewhere in Charlottesville. I'm not sure, but I've heard about it. I think University of Virginia. Plus, you live in Mount Airy also. Wow, great location. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. If there are no further questions from members of the committee, the chair now recognizes Councilmember Brooks.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to just chime in real quick and just say thank you for allowing me to speak and be a part of this hearing. And I also want to thank Chris and Allison for their testimony today and the work that they've done on this program, and even the considerations that I pushed really hard around the expansion to my neighborhood, which is, the southern part of the Northwest Division, as well as just the work that Allison has done to become more connected. And I'm very hopeful that Philadelphia, as we begin on this road to recovery, that is safe, green, and equitable transportations are available for everyone. And I'm really excited about this work. Thank you so much, Chairperson Parker, for this opportunity, and have a great day.
Madam Chair, I have a point of information.
Sure. Go ahead, Councilman.
I believe Councilmember Brooks is very familiar with a very nice part of town.
Yes.
Councilwoman Brooks, I want to know, that was very tastefully done. Very tastefully done. Very well done, and thank you for your leadership. The chair now, I can visually see Councilmember Squilla. Councilmember Squilla, did you have any comments you wanted to make? Okay. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Or is there anyone else here to testify on the bill whose name has not been called? Hearing none, Rachel, will you please call the first panel we have to testify this afternoon on bill number 200355?
Chair Parker, may I just add one more thing, just as a response to your comment? I wanted to say, as a person who can also not change the color of my skin, I have been digging deep, especially these last few weeks, to understand not only what we've done in the past 4 years at Bike Transit, but what further I can do. And I'm deeply looking at the ownership and the leadership of my company, the pressure that I am putting on my suppliers, my colleagues, the people who report to me, to truly own systemic racism and to take responsibility for it and do better. So I recognize that power and money mean everything, and we intend to follow that within Bike Share and within Bike Transit. So thank you so much for your time.
Councilmember Brooks, I know you're still watching. I think you better recruit Allison, because any smart restart we have of Philadelphia's economy, we need to have an entrepreneur who's put their money, their wealth, power, and influence, with their Black Lives Matter verbal commitment. So we don't have a whole lot of people who walk the walk and talk the talk. So thank you, Allison, again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Rachel, please call the first panel we have to testify this afternoon on bill number 200355.
It's just one individual, Rich Laser.
You've been multitasking, Mr. Laser. I gotta feel you've been multitasking this whole time.
I try.
Thank you for your presence. Just state your name for the record, and please feel free to proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Parker and members of the committee. My name is Rich Laser. I'm Deputy Mayor for Labor, and I appear before you today to testify in support of Bill number 200355. In the summer of 2018, Bill number 180293 was passed and signed by Mayor Kenny. This bill was to strike and vacate the portion of Packer Avenue from Delaware Avenue to the Pierhead Line of Delaware River from the City Plan. Bill number 200355 is here for consideration today because the property owners have reached out to the city and indicated they need a 6-month extension in order to complete the agreement. There are a number of property owners who will be affected by the street closure, and they have been in internal negotiations regarding the agreement over the 2-year window. The city's understanding is that the negotiations are nearly completed, and it is possible the parties will go beyond the 2-year mark. The Philadelphia Regional Port Authority has reached out to our department about extending the deadline, and we are happy to collaborate with them on this matter. I'd also like to thank Councilmember Squilla for introducing the ordinance. This is an administration bill, and we thank you for considering it at this time. I'm ready to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Laser, for your testimony. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee? Is there anyone else here to testify on a bill whose name has not been called yet?
You don't want your feet up?
Can
you see this in the background? Is it okay for
Okay, there being no further questions from members of the committee and no other witnesses to testify, I will ask if there's anyone else present in this hearing whose name we have failed to call and that wishes to offer testimony on any of the bills or resolutions that are being considered today. Hearing none, I want to thank all of the panels and witnesses for their participation today. We value your opinions. I now invite all panels and witnesses to please disconnect from the meeting before we go into our public meeting. We will now pause for a minute, pause the proceedings, and we will briefly ask multiple participants who are still on to please leave the hearing. And so, colleagues, this will take our technical staff just a few minutes. And then we will conclude the public hearing and go into our public meeting. So let's just give our technical staff a few seconds. Councilman Green, I see you queued up in the chat box. Is that from previously? Do you have anything you need to add?
No, that was previously. I'm ready for the public meeting.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Technical team, you guys will let us know, Lonnie, when we're ready to proceed. Rachel and Lonnie, are we prepared now?
Yes, we are ready on our end.
Okay, thank you, Lonnie. This concludes the public hearing of the committee. We will now go into a public meeting to consider the action to be taken on the bills before the committee today. We will now convene the public meeting. Rachel, will you please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance will please indicate that you are present when your name is called. Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on the screen as you speak. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Derek Green.
Present, ready for the public meeting.
Councilmember David O.
Present. Thank you for the hearing.
Councilmember Helen Gim.
Present.
Councilmember Curtis Jones.
Present and ready for the hearing meeting.
Councilmember Brian O'Neill.
Present. I'm here.
Councilmember Cindy Bass.
I am present. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez.
Present and eager.
Councilmember Mark Squilla.
Present, and thank you, Madam Chair, for a great hearing.
Does that conclude the roll, Rachel?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Councilmember Green for a motion on bill number 200363.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that bill number 200363 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council.
Second.
The chair notes that for the record, Councilmember O has seconded that motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that bill number 200363 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further moved that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it.
Madam Chair Lady,
Yes.
this is Brian O'Neill. I'd like to be recorded as voting no.
Okay, we have one nay vote. That is Councilmember O'Neill, who will be recorded as nay. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The chair recognizes Councilmember Jones for a motion on bill number 200367.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that bill number 200367 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at our next session of council.
Second.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember David O seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that bill number 200367 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Aye.
No, Madam Chair Lady, Brian O'Neill, I'd like to be recorded as voting no.
Councilmember Brian O'Neill will be recorded as voting no.
And
The
also on the resolution when it comes up.
The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The chair recognizes Councilmember Jones for a motion on the amendment to resolution number 200377.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I offer an amendment to resolution number 200377. A copy of this amendment has been circulated to all members of the committee, and I move that the amendment to resolution number 200377 be approved.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember O seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that the amendment to resolution number 200377 be approved. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 We have one opposed. Councilman Brian O'Neill. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the amendment to resolution number 200377 has been approved. The chair recognizes Councilmember Jones for a motion on resolution number 200377 as amended.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I move that resolution number 200377 as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember O seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that resolution number 200377 as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
No.
One no. Councilmember O'Neill is a no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The chair recognizes Councilmember Green for a motion on the amendment to bill number 200370.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I offer an amendment to bill number 200370. A copy of the amendment has been circulated to all members of the committee. I move that the amendment to bill number 200370 be approved.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember O seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that the amendment to bill number 200370 be approved. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Aye. The ayes have it, and the motion carries, and the amendment to bill number 200370 has been approved. The chair recognizes Councilmember Green for a motion on bill number 200370 as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that bill number 200370 as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember O seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that Bill number 200370 as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The chair recognizes Councilmember Squilla for a motion on Bill number 200355.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the motion 200355 200355 be approved with a suspension of the rules to be read next session of council.
Second.
Seconded. So Councilman Squilla moved, that he recommended that bill be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and that we suspend the rules and permit first reading at our next session of council. That motion was seconded by Councilmember David O. It has been moved and properly seconded that the bill number 200355 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. This concludes the meeting. This concludes the business before the Committee on Law and Government today, and it was a long one, but it was necessary. And colleagues, I want to say this. I think that everything that needed to come together while we were working during this hearing will hopefully come together. And once we get off here, let's hope everything else is smooth sailing as we go about trying to bring some resolution and conducting the people's business. Thank you all so much for your patience, and have a good day.
Great job, Madam Chair.
Thank you.